Imagine you're just starting your day with your son, his girlfriend, and friends. It's a sunny morning on Memorial Day weekend. You're cooking breakfast together, smiling, laughing, joking, and then all the happiness turns to shock, horror, and complete devastation. That's what happened to the family we're about to talk about. This case has haunted me for a very long time. The murder of a Florida woman by a clown is by far one of the hardest to wrap my head around. And what's worse is that it took police 27 years to make an arrest. The first thing I want to do is set the stage for this horrific story, and it starts with living the good life. The location is in Wellington, Florida. It's an exclusive, upscale, and highly sought-after part of Palm Beach County, which is a very affluent area, well known for Trump's 20-acre Mar-a-Lago, the Oceanside Kennedy compound. Bruce Springsteen lives there, and it's where Bill Gates bought a $59 million horse farm. Wellington is also well known for its equestrian community, where homeowners keep horses in their backyards. It's also known for its airplane neighborhoods, and one of them is called the Aero Club. Every house in this type of neighborhood backs up to the community's own private 4,000-foot runway that you can use to land your own plane, and you get your very own airplane hangar. Many residents actually take their helicopters to and from work so they can avoid traffic. So saying that, I think you can tell what kind of people live in Wellington. This sounds wonderful, but there's also stuff like this that happens, but I guess it just comes with living in that territory. A couple named Marlene and Michael Warren lived in the Aero Club with their 2 sons from Marlene's previous marriage, Joe and John Arendas. Marlene was married as a teenager, and after her divorce, she remarried to Michael Warren when she was just 20 years old, and her boys were just toddlers at the time. Interestingly, I noticed there was no gate at the Aero Club, so anyone could come and go as they pleased, which I found to be kind of odd. I know I'd want my planes and my expensive home to be protected, but perhaps in the 90s, things were a little bit different, and they might have had home security systems. The couple owned upward of 8 rental properties, a couple of racehorses, as well as a used car lot called Bargain Motors, where they would rent, lease, and sell used cars. In total, their net worth was over $1 million, so by all outward appearances, their lives seemed to be pretty typical for the type of individuals living in this area. It looked as though they were living the American dream. However, things weren't exactly as perfect as they seemed. We wouldn't be here if they were. Marlene's son Joe had recently been charged with aggravated assault in 1986. The family could afford a good lawyer, so Joe was able to walk away with only 6 months of house arrest in 1989. He was about 17 at the time, and it was chalked up to him being a hormonal teenage boy. He served his time without anything going wrong, and eventually the issue was completely forgotten about, just swept under the rug. What's worse is that in the fall of 1988, tragedy struck the Warren family. Marlene's son John, only 22 at the time, was tragically killed in a car accident. And that's when it seemed like Marlene and Michael's marriage allegedly started to fall apart. When a tragedy like this happens, it either brings the family together or tends to pull them apart, depending on their support system, their coping skills, and just their personalities and how strong their marriage. Joe stated that Michael became kind of distant, and he also said in his own words that he wasn't around as much as you'd say he should have been. He wasn't there for Marlene as much as he was before, so something had definitely changed. Now I'm going to bring you to what happened to Marlene. It was Saturday, May 26th, 1990, Memorial Day weekend. Michael Warren was on his way to the horse race track. He was with some of his friends, and Marlene decided to stay home with her son Joe, who was now 21. She was making food for him, his girlfriend Jeannie Pratt, and some of his friends. Jeannie had just sat down to eat, and something caught her eye. She saw a small white car pull up into the driveway. She then told Marlene, who went to go look out the door. When Marlene opened the door, she saw a clown standing outside. The clown walked up to her with the doors open at this point and handed her 2 balloons and a basket of flowers. Everyone inside thought it was really cute and assumed that Michael had something to do with it. Marlene even said, "Oh, how pretty." One of the balloons even had, You're the greatest on it, and if that's not eerie or disgusting as a clown coming up to your front door, I don't know what is. The other balloon had Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on it. And it's not for nothing that I'm telling you these things. All of a sudden, they heard what sounded like a balloon popping. But then Marlene fell to the floor, and that's when everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. The clown then turned around and slowly and calmly walked back down their driveway. Everyone in the house immediately started to freak out, and when they looked, there was blood pooling around Marlene's head. What had started out as a surprise delivery quickly turned everyone's heart cold. The clown had pulled out a .38 caliber and shot Marlene in the face at point-blank range. Jeannie was the first one that attended to Marlene right away because Joe had broken his leg and he had a cast on it at the time, so it took him longer to get to the door and to his mother. Jeannie got the first sight of the entry wound, and it was right above Marlene's upper lip. Someone dressed as a clown shot and killed a Wellington mother as she simply answered her front door. At this point, Joe hobbled out the door and he tried to go down the driveway towards the clown as it got into a white Chrysler Lebaron, which was sitting right in the driveway with the door open and the engine still running. There was also a neighbor, Bill Kramer, that was walking his dog nearby with his wife. He remembers hearing a sound that sounded like someone using a nail gun, and he just thinks someone must be doing construction. But then he sees something in the distance, the kids yelling, running out of the house, screaming that someone had killed Marlene. Bill decided to stay on the scene with the boys, and his wife ran to call 911. Everyone at this point was in complete shock as to what had just happened, but most confusing was why. Why Marlene? She was known as a quiet woman that the neighbors said they barely spoke to, but she seemed like a normal, pleasant mother. She was friendly. She would say hello to the other people in the community, but that was pretty much all they knew. Joe was seen screaming and cursing at the clown and trying to get a good look at who was behind the costume. He did end up catching a glimpse as the clown drove down the driveway, full face of makeup and these piercing eyes. They were these deep, empty brown eyes. So Joe and Jeannie jumped into Joe's red Corvette, and they sped off to follow the clown, but they quickly lost sight of the car, and they never had a chance to catch up. By the time the couple came back, detectives were already on the scene and a medical team was working on Marlene. An ambulance rushed her to the hospital as fast as possible, and then she was admitted to Palms West in extreme critical condition. A bullet had gone straight through her mouth into her throat and actually lodged in her spinal cord. She was put on life support, and Joe stayed by her side, comforting her, but she remained unconscious. As Marlene was holding on as long as she could, Joe never left her side. He sat there for hours on end, holding her hand, comforting her, and he repeatedly begged her not to leave him, which is so sad. He told her how much he loved her. And then Michael showed up as well. He rushed to be by Marlene's side, and he also stayed with her until Marlene's mother, Shirley, was able to get to Florida to see her daughter for one last time. But despite their best efforts, Marlene never woke up, and the family had to make the really hard decision to take her off life support. It was absolutely devastating to hear her mother talk about Marlene's last moments. No one can be prepared for that, especially a mother. And as soon as the life support was taken off, Marlene was gone. She was officially declared dead on May 28, 1990. Police began their investigation right away. They thought it couldn't have been a random killing, that this person must have known Marlene, especially to know where she lived, and that she would be home that day. They felt that this crime was very personal and malicious, that it was committed with intent, and done so in a very evil and heartless manner. They knew they were looking for someone very dangerous, but with the costume involved, they didn't know if they were looking for a man or a woman. They wanted to issue a standard BOLO at this time, which is an acronym for Be on the Lookout, but what wasn't standard was the description: someone in a clown costume. Now I want to stop right here, because there's an educational piece that I want to add to this entire situation that comes into play later on, and I think it's very important to mention. I'm not an expert. This is what I'm currently learning in class right now. the most common mistakes that are made at a crime scene. It's actually very common for evidence to be contaminated, and this is something that happens accidentally because while they're trying to care for someone in the moment and save their life, they're not exactly caring where they're stepping. And if they're stepping on evidence, you should be blocking off the scene as soon as possible, making sure that there is a clear path set for personnel to walk through, and you're also logging every single person that's on the scene, witnesses, and family members. Sometimes they just go quickly into ruling it as a natural death or an accident with the information that was given to you about the 911 call and things like that. And this can make them fail to see evidence that's really important to the investigation, and it could lead to the wrong pictures being taken and the integrity of certain evidence to be diminished or even destroyed. Speaking of photography, photography is one of the most important things when it comes to crime scenes because they change so rapidly. If you fail to take enough pictures or take them quickly enough, this could be a major problem later on, especially since not everyone that's an expert is going to get to the scene and see it the way it was when it first occurred. Gathering as much information as possible about the victim themselves, because victimology, which relates to who a victim was, their personality, what they did for a living, their education level, their habits on a daily basis, reputation, are extremely important in any case that involves a crime. And I want to point out that this is not victim blaming. I see that a lot in my comments, in other true crime YouTubers' comments, and all over in Facebook groups. Victimology and victim blaming are two totally different things. Victimology is very important when you're trying to solve a case. Who the victim was definitely matters. It matters if they were a sex worker or they had a habit of doing drugs. That is not victim blaming. Saying a woman that wears a miniskirt or goes out late at night and deserves what she got is victim blaming, and that's just being a douchebag. It has nothing to do with solving a crime. And the last and final common mistake, for political reasons, and even trying to solve the case quicker because there's pressure within the community, which is actually something we see later on in this case, or certain conclusions are being pushed because of those reasons onto investigators, and they end up going in the wrong direction. So let me know going forward in the comments if you see any of these mistakes happening in this case. Now let's go back to the story. 3 hours later, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office gets a 911 call from an anonymous caller, and they say to take a closer look at Marlene's husband, Michael. But what was specifically said will come into play a little later. Meanwhile, Marlene's parents are being interviewed, and they told police that she did not have any enemies that they knew of. Her mother remembers Marlene as an outstanding woman that would do anything for anyone. It's really not uncommon for parents to paint a very positive picture. Not that Marlene wasn't any of these things, but I tend to find that this is the way many victims are described. But Marlene's dad said she was courteous and respectful and just an all-around good person. What was creepy to me was the fact that police noticed 3 clown paintings in Marlene's childhood home. There were even a bunch of clowns on display in the home, and the family loved and collected them. They even dedicated a room to circus clowns. So I thought isn't that strange, or is it just me? And what's even more haunting is the fact that Marlene herself actually painted one of those portraits of a clown when she was just 14 years old. Is that just a scary coincidence? I don't know, but I don't think I could ever look at a clown again if one of my family members had this happen to them. But it seems like Marlene's mom still holds clowns near and dear to her heart. Not only were her parents grieving, but Marlene's husband just lost his wife so suddenly and in such a horrific manner. And Marlene's parents knew Michael very well, and they described him as a good, hard-working, confident man. But that's not how everyone described Michael. One neighbor said he was out of place in their community. He was an outcast. He had somewhat of a bad attitude. He was rough around the edges. Because normally in this kind of community, they're very close-knit, and everyone knew each other. They would spend time at the local country club, they would shop at the same grocery stores, but they never remember seeing Michael. And sources say that Michael was always surrounded by trouble. On one occasion, his plane had disappeared, and it finally turned up with the engine broken, and no one did anything. They just swept it under the rug. No one ever found out what happened. It would be pretty hard, in my opinion, for that to go unnoticed. Stealing a damn plane. Then one of his racehorses died, and it just showed up dead with no explanation. And I guess that's a big deal in an equestrian kind of community. And then he does have a criminal history, but nothing specific that investigators would think could lead to someone wanting to kill his wife. Still, investigators have to give it some weight, especially because of the strange comment that Marlene made to her parents before her death. She said, "If something happens to me, Michael did it." Police start their investigation very quickly since the community is putting a lot of pressure on them. They want this case solved, and they want it solved now. They're on edge, they're shocked, they're scared, they feel violated, knowing that someone came into their neighborhood so easily and carried out this gruesome crime. They thought it may happen again. They thought there could be a serial killer in their community just roaming around. Investigators start out by looking for the things they know. A person wearing a clown costume, driving a Chrysler LeBaron, or a .38 caliber. They also decide to set up surveillance vehicles to observe who showed up at Marlene's funeral and who didn't, but that didn't really lead to any clues. However, leads do start to come in, especially with this high-profile type case in the area. The police were looking for costume stores in the area, and they stumbled upon one where two women worked, Deborah and Barbara, and they had been running a costume shop in the town. Back then, there were only 3 related stores in Palm Beach County. People were not buying things online. There wasn't like Amazon. You had to actually go to the store, try on the costuming, and buy it there. But Deborah says that someone came into the store on the night before Marlene's murder after the store was closed for the night. The ladies were still inside finishing up, and they see a customer at the door knocking for them to open it. It was a lady, and she insisted that they let her in to get a costume. When they asked her, "Could you come back later, like tomorrow when we're open?" she said no, she needed a costume right now. They also thought that was super suspicious because it was nowhere near Halloween. They could understand if you know your kids don't have a costume, you need to get in. Tomorrow's Halloween, no, this was May. Plus, she knew specifically what she wanted. She asked for a full clown outfit, makeup, shoes, sponge nose, wig, everything. I did some digging, and I found out it was a Ruby's clown costume and Bob Kelly clown makeup, in case you were wondering. I'm pretty sure you're not going to wear this costume for Halloween, but that's what I found out. I wanted to try to be as accurate as possible when I tried to imagine what this person looked like coming up to Marlene's door. A lot of people describe the clown as having the look of Bozo the Clown. Deborah gives police a description of a woman around 5 feet 8 inches with big brown eyes, long, pretty, thick, deep brown hair, wearing a pair of jeans and a men's work shirt. But other eyewitnesses at the house said that they thought the clown was a 6-foot man. This person paid in cash, and the items came out to be about $80. Finally, Deborah asked the police why they were being questioned, and when they told her the bad news about Marlene, her heart just sank, because she realized at that moment that she could have potentially sold this costume to a murderer. Another interesting turn in the case came when they were examining one of the balloons. Remember how I described them? This seems impossible since it's just a balloon, but as fate would have it, one of them was a special balloon. It was only sold at one Publix grocery store in Palm Beach County. When the employees that were interviewed at Publix, they told police that the person who bought the balloons also bought the flowers. And this was at 9:22 a.m., only an hour and a half before the murder. She was a white woman with long dark hair, and in the 90s, there weren't any cameras to prove that this woman was in the store. She paid with cash, so the purchases couldn't be linked to anyone. But there was one more clue that they had yet to find, and that was the one that would really narrow in on the suspect: the car. They were able to locate the car only 4 days after the crime was committed, and it was abandoned in a Winn-Dixie grocery store parking lot in a Royal Palm Beach shopping plaza, which was only 8 miles from Marlene's house. They went through this car with a fine-tooth comb, and they didn't find any weapons, and they didn't find any fingerprints. Maybe the clown was wearing gloves, I don't know. At the very same time, police were questioning employees of Michael's businesses, and many of them suspected that Michael was having an affair. And there were rumors that had been swirling around the office that he was hanging around a woman. But she allegedly no longer worked for Michael. While this was happening, investigators got their first solid lead in the case. They confirmed that they had found the right car. Not only was it a white Chrysler LeBaron, but because they found two important clues, they found quite a few. And I don't know how much quite a few is. Synthetic orange fibers were found on the driver's side of the vehicle, and mixed in with the fibers were strands of long brown human hair, believed to belong to a woman. So far, it seems like this is the same person at the house, same person matching the description at Publix, same car, and now evidence that someone driving the car may have matched the description. Going back to Michael, it's pretty standard to suspect the husband. So after Marlene passed and Michael was finally able to be questioned, he said that he had a solid alibi. His story of driving to the racetrack at the time checked out, but this did not mean he wasn't conspiring with someone else who actually committed this crime, someone like a woman named Sheila Keen. Sheila Keen was more of a deep South Florida girl. She grew up in a small town around the Everglades, which is a wetland in Florida and much different than Wellington. That's for sure, but it's actually really beautiful in its own way and very special. It is the only remaining subtropical wilderness in the United States. It consists of 1.5 million acres of sawgrass marshes, mangrove forest, and hardwood hammocks, and it's the home to many endangered, rare, and exotic animals. My dad told me that many criminals would dump bodies in the Everglades to never be seen again because the alligators would take care of them. Sheila was a true country girl. She was very pretty, always had the attention of all the boys around her. But one thing everybody knew about Sheila was that she had big dreams. She wanted to get out of the Everglades and be rich. She was super into money, and she wanted to live the good life. The way that Sheila was brought up, she was a tough girl, and she found herself in a tough business. She repossessed cars. People told police that she was the type of person that wasn't scared of walking up to just anybody's home, whether it was day or night, and confronting them, or just pulling up her flatbed truck and taking their car. Sheila was 26 years old, a single mother at the time, and she was separated from her husband. Her and Michael ended up connecting because Michael needed someone to repossess cars he sold when people could not come up with their payments. And these cars we're talking about, they're not the greatest. They were described as cars that someone pretty desperate would buy, people that had bad credit, criminal records, sketchy pasts, and therefore it was said that Sheila carried a gun with her just in case anything went south. It's not unusual for people to be strapped in Florida. I was too when I lived in downtown Jacksonville. It can get pretty rough out there, and rightfully so. Sheila had encounters where people would come out of their house with shotguns while she was trying to repossess their vehicles. Some sources say that Sheila worked directly under Michael, but then other people reported that she was sort of a freelance worker, if you will, an independent contractor, and that she had more of a partnership relationship with Michael. But regardless of which version is accurate, the two of them had a very close working relationship. Marlene herself was also very heavily involved in the used car lot, so she knew Sheila as well. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the businesses were in Marlene's name. Michael was questioned about this possible affair with Sheila, and he was adamant that they were strictly in business together. However, there were accounts from employees that they would go on long lunches together. This doesn't necessarily mean that people are cheating, but okay, I guess that's fair. But they could have been talking about business. But then something else happens that makes them take an even closer look at Sheila. Remember the anonymous phone call that I said I was going to get back to later? The reason they told police to look into Michael is because there were rumors around town that Michael was helping Sheila financially, and it wasn't just related to helping her with a job and paying her as an employee. There was more to it. At this time, in 1990, Sheila was married to a man named Richard Keen, who also worked in the car repossession business. So if the rumors were true about the affair, it meant that both of them were cheating on their spouses, Michael and Sheila. And Sheila's marriage was definitely not a good one. She was living in her own apartment. Some people believe that Michael was paying her rent at this apartment. Supposedly, Marlene knew about the affair, and her mother even told police that she had confided in her that the marriage was on the rocks. Joe said to police that only 2 weeks before her murder, Marlene told him that she planned to move out and find her own place. Then Marlene's mother confirmed. This is because she told Marlene that she was welcome to come back home in Vegas. One day when Michael had detailers working on a customer's car in the lot, the customer said Marlene showed up out of nowhere and started yelling at him. According to this customer, Marlene specifically said to Michael that he was a sinking ship and that he would lose everything he owned if he kept screwing with her. Her words. Now, tell me what you think about this. After Marlene left, the men detailing the car that worked for him said that he went up to them and said that one of them could be the richest man alive and a very happy person that would never have to work again if one of them would get rid of the does. It sounds like a joke to you? I don't know, maybe? And it's pretty unknown where this timeline of events occurred. But let me just say, it's not that uncommon to say things you don't actually mean. And this isn't in defense of Michael. I'm really not a fan of people saying things as a joke or out of frustration that can be very hurtful. Sometimes there's truth to it even if they just mean to release it out of frustration. I'm pretty sure either you've said something like that or you've heard someone say something like that. They sometimes say, "I could just kill you," or "If I find out he's cheating, I'll kill him." But they don't actually mean it, considering the circumstances that happened. And then he's talking to other men, and he's embarrassed in the moment. Do you think he's joking or not? One interesting lead came in that Sheila had allegedly been seen wearing a clown costume into an auto parts store that she used to go to very often to entertain the owner's children. But this was never confirmed, so we don't know if someone's making it up to, put the blame on her. But while looking into Sheila, they discovered some weird things about her husband, Richard. He was 20 years older, which I don't know. That doesn't seem that weird to me. But what is weird is he was involved in the KKK. Supposedly, when they questioned Sheila's husband about whether she owned a gun, he said that they did own a .38, but that Sheila had misplaced it about a month before Marlene's death. Oh, that's convenient. When police questioned Sheila, she denied having the affair. She said they were merely good friends. So now they're not just business associates or partners, but they're really good friends. Of course, police interviewed the tenants at the apartment where she lived, and they said they thought Sheila and Michael were married because they saw them together so much. The security guard, it's surprising that Sheila's apartment building had the security guard and Michael and Marlene's didn't, but he said that Sheila told him to add Michael to a list of people that could come in the gate without having to call her to approve their visits. Okay, I thought this was weird, but then again, if he was just trying to be nice, if he was just trying to help her, she is a young single mother. Maybe he just had a soft spot for this woman, and he didn't want his wife to get the wrong idea. Maybe he was just being low-key about it. What if they went to lunch there because it was close by where they were working? But either way, police got a warrant to search her apartment. They took some of her clothing as well as some hairs from her trash bin to compare to the hair they found in the vehicle. Now they're turning their attention back to Michael once again after hearing that he's frequenting Sheila's apartment. And they really want to nail down Michael's alibi. And it turns out there was proof that he was driving to a racetrack 50 miles away when the crime occurred. And he had witnesses, because his friends were there with him in the car. But what we have to take into account is that the person who stood to gain a lot was Michael. Marlene's life insurance policy, and by inheriting all the businesses, he wouldn't have to split anything. In the event of a divorce, it would have been an over 7-figure inheritance. Marlene's parents were convinced that Michael at the very least knew more than he was letting on, and Marlene's father decided to confront Michael. He didn't think that Michael physically hurt Marlene, but he thought that Michael had information that he wasn't giving up. But Michael just denied it, and he just responded with, "Honestly, I don't know anything." But the police aren't so sure about that. If Michael was not in town, who would have had access to Marlene through knowledge of her whereabouts? They were concerned that Marlene may have been taken out of the picture because he was helping Sheila financially. Perhaps she wanted him to contribute more, and he could do that and give her more if Marlene was gone. They could just do away with her and then live the good life. But just like Michael, Sheila had her own alibi that she would give police. She said it's impossible for her to be the one that committed the crime because she was out doing her job repossessing cars. They don't even have surveillance to figure out if there's a clown driving a car. So how would they prove or disprove where Sheila was? Remember the white LeBaron? Well, guess what? I really wish you could guess. But you know what business Michael is in, right? Yeah, cars. And guess where that LeBaron was connected? Yeah, good old Mikey has a lot of explaining to do because they discovered that the car had been stolen from another used car lot and somehow ended up in Michael's lot. What? How is this possible? A competitor of Michael's that owned a dealership called Payless. We got Bargain Motors, we got Payless. He was running an ad and says that Michael ends up allegedly purposely copying this ad. And this was about a month before Marlene's death. And there was a couple that rented the LeBaron from Payless. And when they were bringing it back, they got confused and they mistakenly returned it to Michael's lot, where employees allegedly told the couple to just park the car on the street, leave the keys in the visor, and they would take care of it. Mysteriously, the LeBaron was stolen from the street that night. Of course, police ended up doing an even more extensive investigation into the used car lot, and after 5 hours in there going through everything, they couldn't prove that Michael stole the car, and there wasn't any evidence connecting him to Marlene's murder. But what they did find was evidence that Sneaky Mikey was tampering with the odometers. I'm sure you know what that is, but in case you don't, it's the dial on your car that tells you how many miles are on it. And he was advertising that cars had way fewer miles than they really did. It turns out that this can actually be a very lucrative business. It makes the cars more valuable than they really are. He would buy them low and then sell them way higher, and he had been doing this for years. So you can only imagine how many cars were tampered with. They arrest him, they charge him for fraud, and they actually charge him with 66 crimes in total related to his used car business. Not good news. He's convicted of 43 counts of racketeering, theft, and of course, the fraud related to the odometers. One of his bookkeepers comes forward, Della Ward. She was actually on Michael's side. She was upset because she said cops kept pressuring her to talk about Michael, and it seemed like they just wanted to pin everything on him. But she refused to do that because she said he's not a cold-hearted person. He was always very good to her, and she did not believe he would hurt Marlene. But I was thinking, maybe just maybe she was scared she would get in trouble because she was his bookkeeper. And if those books were cooked, then she has something to worry about. Going back 13 months before Marlene was murdered, there was another incident that in hindsight should have been a red flag of what was to come. Remember that Joe, Marlene's son, was on trial? Well, apparently, Michael had gone up to Joe's lawyer, Christopher DeSantis, and asked him a really weird question. If a husband would inherit his wife's estate if he murdered her. Oh my God, Michael, because this is a giant waving red flag to anyone with common sense. But the police didn't learn about this until 1991, so they interviewed the lawyer to learn more about it. I'll say the rest of what he said in a moment, but let's go back to 1990 and the white car. Even though they could not prove it was Sheila who bought the costume, they had reasonable cause for suspicion. And when they searched the apartment in Pine Ridge of Haverhill, there was a pair of shoes they found that fit the description of what the clown was wearing. And on the shoes they found strands of brown hair and orange synthetic fibers that looked like they came from a wig. Unfortunately, back in 1990, the DNA technology wasn't advanced enough, so they couldn't confirm that the fibers were exactly the same as the ones found in the car. They could only say they were similar. So this means the tests are inconclusive. But at the very least, now you have this connection that is much more solid than an eyewitness account. Especially because at this point, the case is so public that many eyewitnesses, whether it's at the costume store or in Publix, they're coming forward and saying that the person they saw buying the items in connection with the case matched Sheila's description. But you can never be 100% sure about eyewitness testimony. It can change once people get more information. They tend to make a connection that might not be there. And also, legally speaking, it is not illegal for a woman to be buying flowers and balloons in a clown suit. And something I found interesting was, as a matter of fact, people that were employed as clowns at this time, while they were being interviewed during the case, they told investigators that the entire clown industry had taken a hit. The entertainers were not able to be financially stable, as they were before, because no one wanted to hire a clown. And then the regular items they would purchase for events became suspicious. They would get stared at when they came into costume stores, and people would even call the police. I don't blame them. People were just probably trying to be very diligent. They still didn't have enough evidence to give to prosecutors to get a conviction for Sheila, so she was not arrested. And you may be angry about this, but in the eyes of the law, they want to be really confident that they have the right person, and more importantly, that they have enough evidence for justice. Because if not, the killer could go free if a jury finds that reasonable doubt. That's it. And here they had circumstantial evidence, and there's just no do-overs. So remember the incident regarding Michael's son Joe's lawyer and the weird comments? Well, in 1991, the police finally brought DeSantis in for an interview. In addition to what I previously mentioned, he said there was even more incriminating evidence. Hold on to your phones or your computer because supposedly Mr. DeSantis actually answered Michael in depth. In my opinion, especially since later on he said Michael was nuts and that he didn't take him seriously. Really? Well then why did this attorney respond with this? You ready? Quote, "It really isn't an issue of whether a man kills his wife. The question is whether a man is convicted of murdering his wife, because if he's convicted of murdering his wife, then he wouldn't inherit. But if he were convicted of a lower charge, he would. But if he had a friend do it, and they couldn't tie him as an accessory to the friend, he'd get away scot-free." While none of this proves that Michael actually took the advice literally and did anything, it does provide a potential motive. But before I talk about that, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. You mean to tell me that a lawyer admits he seriously told a man that if he hired someone to murder his wife, but he wasn't caught, that he would inherit his wife's estate? I don't recall learning to give that advice when I was in law school. I think the fact that Michael was even asking a lawyer about murder related to his wife is really gross. And the fact that the lawyer even responded was super unprofessional, in my opinion, because Michael wasn't even his client. Upon his wife's death, not only did Michael receive a payout of Marlene's life insurance policy, but he received all of her estate. He was the sole owner of all the rental properties and the used car business, and supposedly he even cut Joe off from getting much of anything. When Michael was questioned by police, he said that money was of no importance to him. But okay, what about the alleged comments he made at the car dealership, or him having an airplane, or him betting on horses at the racetrack? You're not doing it for money. He actually states no, his wife is the one that owns the properties, that some of the tenants in their properties may have had a vendetta, and that because Marlene was the one that handled everything in regard to the business and the tenants, that someone could have been mad about being evicted and they hurt Marlene. But the police could not find any connection there. Unfortunately for Michael, he was not spending any of the money that he inherited anytime soon, because he was charged in 1992 for the aforementioned crimes, and eventually he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Michael had a good lawyer. He had money, so he only served 3 years and 9 months of his sentence. All the while, Marlene's case went cold. So both Michael and Sheila got to move on with their lives while Marlene's killer walked the street. Michael was out around 1997, and in 2000, Sheila divorced her husband for good, and she left town with her son, and nobody talked about her again. I'm sure they did, but you know what I mean. It wasn't as publicized. People had forgotten about the case. By 2004, Michael had actually moved almost 1,000 miles away to a cute little small town called Abington, Virginia, which is a part of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was nice and secluded, and he ended up getting remarried. And him and his new wife, Debbie, who he affectionately referred to as Deb, he told friends that this was her childhood nickname given to her by her dad, and he liked to continue that tradition. They were such an adorable, sweet couple, according to friends, and even though they were far away from the fast life in Palm Beach, they were still living in their own little paradise in a place called Heron Point, which was on the South Houston Lake. And this was in another well-to-do community. I found a picture of the home, and as you can see, it's not the typical small-town style home by any means. It has a private dock on the lake. I'm sure they spent a lot of time enjoying nature and living the more private life, especially after such a public tragedy had occurred in Michael's life. The couple invested in a local restaurant to make a living, and the restaurant was just across the border in Kingsport, Tennessee. It was called the Purple Cow. Debbie was 39 and Michael was 48, and the couple fit right in. They made friends really fast in their neighborhood, and they were really close to one of their neighbors on one side of their house. So Michael goes by Mike now, and everyone described them as a lovely, caring couple. So maybe everyone was wrong about Michael, and they were just blinded by the rumors spreading around town. So maybe what happened to Marlene changed Mike, and he didn't take anything for granted anymore. He definitely seemed to be very in love with Debbie. They were seen being affectionate to one another, and people that knew them said Mike was definitely smitten by Debbie. Their restaurant, the Purple Cow, was very popular locally, and it was also very unique. Here are some pictures of it. It was pretty famous for this huge hamburger, named after Mike himself, called Mike's Intimidator. Mike and Debbie weren't just the owners, they got into the nitty-gritty, they helped with the prep. The couple was extremely hardworking, and they were gems in their community. Nobody knows about Michael's past. There were some employees that told a different story, because reportedly, Debbie was intolerable to work for. She was always irritable and often pretty unreasonable when asked to accommodate the employees' requests, whether they needed time off or it was just something really simple. She demanded perfection, and she would let her employees know that when their performance wasn't up to her standards. But that's kind of understandable. That's your business's reputation. But despite all this, Debbie would supposedly go out and drink with the employees, and this happened pretty often. And I guess some people could see that as unprofessional, but who knows? In 2013, though, Florida State Police were given a grant to reopen the now freezing cold case of Marlene Warren, and this time around, things were different. DNA testing had come leaps and bounds since 1990. First, they started recalling old witnesses to let them know they were reopening the case. Eventually, with the new technology, they were able to confirm that the orange fibers that were found in the car did match the ones in Sheila's apartment and that they belonged to a wig. Next, they tested the hairs that were found in the car, and again it matched what was found in the boots and in Sheila's trash bin. The kicker was that they were able to get skin cells off of the hair because it had been pulled out of the roots. I think it's so interesting. The DNA in the cells matched Sheila Keen. So arrests are already underway. This evidence didn't appear overnight, though, so it would still be a few years before they could make an arrest. And at this point, they were still building their case and searching for the murder weapon. As they were reinvestigating the case and interviewing old witnesses, an old employee of Michael's came forward. He said that a few days after the murder, Michael had handed him several firearms and requested that the employee hide them. So he claims that he took the firearms and hid them in the attic at his mother's house. He also claimed that he knew where the orange fibers came from. It was from a clown wig, but this ended up completely discrediting this witness, and so far, the murder weapon had not been recovered. But a bombshell was about to go off, so hold on tight. This is pretty crazy if it wasn't already a wild ride. In 2016, Michael sells the purple cow and he retires. He's spending more time around the lake house and more time for neighbors on the other side of his house to see a different side to him. They say they catch him on a tractor on their property stealing rocks, and when they confronted him, he was nasty. All they did was tell him to please leave and that he was trespassing, and all he had to do was ask. But Michael was far from neighborly. He basically told them to fall off, and the two men proceeded to get into a yelling match, with Mike asking the owner, "What are you going to do with your scrawny ass?" And then the neighbor yelling back that he was going to beat Mike's fat ass. Those were their words. But the neighbor explained that Michael acted like he had to get whatever he wanted, or else. On the 27th year anniversary of Marlene's death in May of 2017, the investigators are about to close in on the suspected killer. A reporter from the Palm Beach Post is writing an article about the case, and while researching, she finds out that Sheila Keen is remarried as well. But at that point, she thought that her eyes were playing tricks on her when she saw the name of Sheila's new husband, none other than Michael Warren. Wait, how can this be? What about Debbie? What's going on? Was he married to Sheila and he got divorced and now he's with Debbie? So of course, they bring this information to the police, thinking that there must be some kind of mix-up, that possibly there's a clerical error of some kind in the courthouse, was mixing up things in the case, and that the marriage certificate somehow had the wrong information on it. It's not really that probable, but okay. But how crazy is this? The investigators confirm that Michael and Sheila got married 12 years after Marlene's death in 2002 in Vegas in the Little White Wedding Chapel. So where was Sheila now? Why did Michael marry her? Was this the case of business associates getting close because they were both accused of a crime they didn't commit, and then they decided no one would want to be with either one of them, so they end up together? Or was it something more? And were they still married? And what about Debbie? I was like, oh my God, are they going to find Sheila dead? Is this guy a serial killer? The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office had to contact the police sheriff that's in the small town in Virginia. His name is Fred Newman. They let him know that they were looking for Michael Warren. This guy had never dealt with anything like this before, but his job was to find Michael because they were looking to connect him to a murder in 1990. He devises a plan with the department to wait until the couple leaves their home and to follow them. So Michael and Debbie were out driving in their Cadillac Escalade to go visit Michael's mom. The cops had strategically blocked off different roads and they were watching and waiting and reporting where the SUV was going. They set up some sort of roadblock and finally they were able to pull them over. The cops acted like it was just like a routine checkpoint, and they kindly asked for Michael and Debbie's license. But they're not really concerned about Michael. They just ask Debbie to step out of the car and they handcuff her. There is literally footage that I'm going to show you of her in the back of the police car, and she looks as cool as a damn cucumber as far as I'm concerned. And the police say Michael was too, but wouldn't he be freaking out about why his wife was being arrested? No, because Michael knows something that we don't, or maybe you too by now. Debbie was Sheila Keen. Now Debbie Warren. Why didn't anyone know this was her? Well, for one, they were in the middle of nowhere. Two, she changed her name and also her appearance. As you can see, she is now blonde. Sheila was arrested on the charge of murdering Marlene Warren, and she asked, "Oh, is Michael going to be arrested too?" But the cops say no. She told detectives she didn't want to speak to them, and when she got to the station, she just put her head down on the interrogation room table. This woman was weird. She actually smiled when they were booking her. And you know what's creepy? Look at this other booking photo of when she was convicted of shoplifting when she was 21. Wow, she's just all smiles, like it doesn't even faze her. Girl, you are definitely not a Southern belle. What a clown. Of course, their small town was shocked. How could these dangerous people be living right under their noses? Not only that, when some of the people in town were interviewed, police found out that on one occasion, supposedly, allegedly, when Debbie was out partying with the servers and the people from the Purple Cow, she confessed to one of them. probably when she was wasted, who knows, that her real name was Sheila, and that she dressed in a clown costume and killed someone. According to other employees, they had seen pictures of Sheila in a clown costume on several occasions. Did the internet not exist back then? I mean, this was early 2000 and then recently into 2017, and no one thought to look up this case and just check if their boss was really a killer. But you know who does believe that Sheila did it? Marlene's parents. Remember the conversation that she had with her mother about the marriage being on the rocks? And now Michael marries the woman who is the suspected killer? Come on, this cannot be a coincidence. My question though is, why marry Sheila? What's the story? I'm sure we're going to find out at trial, because what happened in those 12 years? What about Michael's parents, you may ask? Well, according to investigators, Michael's mother Joyce said that Sheila had told her a month before Marlene's death that she was in love with Michael. Joyce had joined a group of them, including Michael and Sheila, at the Calder racetrack in Fort Lauderdale back in April 1990. Joyce and Sheila got into somewhat of an argument because Sheila threw a tantrum when she couldn't sit next to Michael. Are you serious? But she was 26 years old, so I don't know. This was only a month before what happened to Marlene. And this was the same racetrack that Michael was on his way to the day that Marlene was killed. There are a lot of details here. We're almost done, but not so fast. Joyce, having this weird argument with Sheila, asked her, "Do you love my son?" And Sheila says, "Yes." But wait for the next statement. A friend of Michael's who was also at the racetrack later told investigators that Joyce had also turned to Michael and asked whether Michael loved Sheila. Listen to what this man said, and I quote, "I love myself." What a weirdo. When going through tons of Michael's financial statements, and I find this to be super suspicious, almost more suspicious than some of the other things we've heard. They were going through bank records, and they found something very odd. Michael's mom received nearly $150,000 from the sale of bonds and stocks just 6 months before her daughter-in-law's murder. She opened a savings account in a safe deposit box at a Southeast bank in Fort Lauderdale in May of 1990, May 17th to be exact. That was less than 2 weeks before Marlene's death. These accounts were opened by Joyce, Michael, and Michael's sister Gail. And get this, a bank statement for that account had 2 deposits with a total close to $60,000 that had been made on May 29th, 3 days after the shooting. Tell me that someone wasn't being paid off or something. Remember the lawyer DeSantis? He was re-interviewed in 2017, right after Sheila was arrested. And you know what he tells prosecutors? No, you don't, but you're gonna find out. This can't be real. He tells prosecutors that he remembered specifically telling Michael during that conversation that if a killer dressed as a clown were to murder his wife, they would get off, because witnesses wouldn't be able to determine whether the assailant was a male or a female. Come on, all along, I'm sitting here thinking that Michael was just so sick, and he knew that Marlene loved clowns, and he knew that she would open the door to a clown bearing gifts, and that's why he might have chosen the clown. But to find out that an attorney actually went so far as to suggest this is appalling. It's just sickening and unprofessional and really concerning. They should honestly be checking up the lawyer's bank statements too. Last year in 2020, Sheila made pleas to be let out on bail pending her trial. It was supposed to happen in 2020, but because of the pandemic, it didn't. Her defense team claims that she posed no threat to anyone because she was innocent of all charges and that she wasn't a flight risk, and they had been waving this banner since she was first arrested. But then recently, they added another reason that she should be allowed out. Her lawyers argued that because of the pandemic, she should be allowed to go home because she could get sick. And they believe that since she was not officially convicted of her crimes, she shouldn't be made to stay in this place that increases her risk of getting sick. Nice try, Sheila. And Michael has money, so of course they've hired a top defense attorney. And friends of Sheila that know her as Debbie still love her, and they said they're not going to abandon her even if she's found guilty. Damn, did they pay for their friends too? Nevertheless, the judge wasn't as caring. He strongly disagreed with her pleas, and the judge said not only does Sheila have the means to flee, but the charges against her carry enough weight to keep her in custody. The judge cited a previous crime that she had been convicted of as more evidence that she should not be released because in 1984 she was arrested for shoplifting and charged with a felony in 1986. She only served 6 months probation for those offenses. Despite the judge's willingness to keep Sheila in prison, the prosecution is still worried about this case falling apart. At the moment, the case is allegedly being held upon these things. 1. The fact that Sheila was involved in the theft of the white car that the clown was seen driving. 2. A person matching her description was seen buying the clown costume. 3. The orange fibers were found in the shoes that she owned. And 4. The hair was found in the car that was linked to her. So wait, fellow fact-finders, can we pause for a moment to think about this? I know it seems like the evidence points clearly to Sheila without a shadow of a doubt, but let's play the defense for just one moment. Sheila worked around the used car lot. She actually repossessed the cars that were found on said lot. So wouldn't there be some reasonable doubt regarding why her hair, and we don't even know how much was found in the car? Only eyewitnesses placed her at the stores buying the items connected to the crime. No fingerprints, no weapon, no blood. Orange fibers found in shoes she owned. But is there any possibility that the defense could argue that transfer happened between the small fibers that may have landed in Michael's home and then later embedded in a pair of his socks or shoes, and then transferred to Sheila's apartment when he visited, then transferring to the floor and to Sheila's socks and eventually shoes that Sheila wore or owned? We're talking fibers, very small, and they can fly around. I mean, it's like the little dust that comes off of our clothing. So, as I was stating before with the educational piece from earlier, you have to remember, if we're looking at this holistically on both sides, was the evidence handled correctly? Was the scene secure? Did any of those 10 mistakes that are common in crime scenes happen in this case? But what personally puts the gavel to the sound block for me is the marriage to Michael. I mean, come on, they're just living their best lives right now. He gets out of prison, she marries him. Wow, I don't understand that. That does it for me because I can't understand why that would be such a coincidence. If we can find some reasonable doubt, I'm sure prosecutors are worried about the jury doing so. I want to tell you one more thing that prosecutors are worried about, and this did happen last year in 2020, so I don't know if it's as relevant, but I wanted to make it a point to tell you. There is a testimony from a man named Jay Mullins. He is a detective on the original case, and he is supposedly the only way they feel that they can link the little DNA evidence they have to Sheila's property. So keep in mind what I just said about the scene and the mistakes and all of that. He's the one that has the ability to testify that when he was on the scene and collected everything, it was done properly. However, because of 2020 and all the stuff that was going on, they didn't know if he would be able to make it into court. So the prosecutors had requested his testimony be recorded and then shown to the jury. But no, because the defense has a great argument and a rebuttal to that. And that is, that's not fair because they cannot cross-examine that witness. The prosecution came back and argued, well, this person is old, he may get sick and he may not be able to travel. The judge denied their request. He said to the prosecution that they had an obligation to either produce Mr. Mullins or not use his testimony at all. Mr. Edmondson's quotes are alarming that he made to the paper in 1990, Department 2000. Just this one portion, State Attorney's Office spokesperson Mike Edmondson said, "The open bags of evidence don't alarm prosecutors. Our only issue is if a defense attorney can successfully raise an evidence tampering issue. This hasn't happened." And then a portion of the quote is not included in the article, so we don't know what else is there. We have complete confidence in Sheriff Newman and the sheriff's office. Now, the significance of this evidence goes without saying. Your Honor has heard most of the evidence at the bond hearing. The state prosecuted this case after 26 years based on this fiber and DNA. So this is one of the basis for them picking up this case. And you know, this evidence contamination goes to our theory of defense. What is there? What is your evidence that they tampered with? That there was tampering, actual intentional tampering with evidence? I'm not saying intentional tampering. I think contamination is what I believe. And my evidence is in 1990. This exact evidence was reviewed by PBSO Crime Lab and the FBI, and they did not find a 6 to 8 inch fiber. And then after these bags were found open in 2013, this fiber suddenly appears. Sheila has been in the Palm Beach County Jail since her arrest, and her case is about to go to trial this year. It's in September 2021. I just wanted to step in real fast and say that another update to this case just happened at the end of last month, around July 29th. That said, they're actually postponing the trial until March 21st, 2022, so we're going to have to wait till then to see what happens. The defense said, because of the age of the case, the location of the witnesses, the rolling Discovery Productions, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, made it difficult to complete their depositions, and you heard a little bit of that from the defense attorney in the Zoom call. So I guess we'll just have to wait. Someone stole the rest of Marlene's life, her husband, and her money. And these actions left Joe without a mom. All of this hurt, all this pain, and this woman was able to get off free for 27 years. And she probably believed she would get away with it if she really did do this. On April 25, 2023, 2 weeks before Keen Warren's trial for the murder of Marlene Warren was to begin, there was another surprise in a case filled with surprises. A plea agreement reached. Miss Keen Warren, defendant herein, will agree to withdraw her previously entered plea of not guilty and to enter a plea of guilty crime. Keen Warren, who was sentenced to death, then life in prison, has now pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. According to sentencing guidelines for time served, she is expected to be released in 2025, perhaps sooner. But Keen Warren has publicly paid the price for this plea deal, admitted in open court that she had, in fact, killed Marlene Warren. Although he admitted his crimes, Keen Warren, through his attorney, maintained his innocence. Michael Warren, in a statement provided to 48 Hours regarding the guilty plea, said, "My wife did not commit this crime. It's hard to see her plead guilty to a crime she didn't commit, but it's not worth the risk." When she was offered a contract to buy a house within 16 to 18 months. This is a story about a couple who worked very hard to achieve the good life, the perfect relationship, and children that love them and bring them joy. But as they say, money can't buy happiness, and you can only hide your secrets for so long. Richard Hicola was born on July 30th, 1942. His family migrated to Cleveland, Ohio in the 19th century and settled near the shore of Lake Erie. Donna Lane Reinhard was born on February 2nd, 1944, also in Ohio, just northeast of Marion. On September 19th, 1964, Richard and Dawn got married. Richard was 22, and Dawn was only 20. They were a young, happy couple, looking forward to spending the rest of their lives together. Richard was attending Ohio State University. He was earning his bachelor's degree in physiological chemistry in 1965 and working on his PhD. A couple of years after they were married, the couple began trying to conceive a child. Richard had just graduated with his PhD in physiological chemistry and was conducting research in biophysics. He was doing this at a laboratory at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons as a research associate. The baby was born on August 7, 1970. His biological mother delivered him at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York, but was admitted under a false name. As soon as she gave birth, she ran out of the hospital and abandoned her son. He spent the first 5 months of his life in foster care while the state tried to locate his biological parents. This was not successful, therefore he was officially put up for adoption. In February 1971, Dawn and Richard adopted the baby when he was only 6 months old, and they named him Matthew Eric Hicola. Dawn felt like she was absolutely made to be a mother, and she spent all of her time being a stay-at-home mom while Richard focused on his scientific research. To their surprise, just a couple of months after the adoption, Dawn found out she was pregnant. It was a miracle. They couldn't believe it. They always wanted a big family, but they never thought this would ever be possible, especially after trying for so long. It's actually been said that once couples stop trying, sometimes things just happen naturally on their own, and that's what seemed to happen for the Heikolas. Dawn was a few months pregnant already when she found out, and she was just so busy with baby Matthew that she hadn't noticed. Soon they found out it was going to be another baby boy, and Dawn and Richard were so happy. The brothers would be best friends. They would have one another to play with and grow up together. Plus, Dawn didn't have to do much to welcome their second son into the world. Since she had already purchased and was gifted so many baby toys and items, it was very easy for her to transition from one boy to two. Joshua David Heikola was born on November 15, 1971. The boys were just over a year apart, with Matthew being 15 months old, so they were raised like twins, sharing everything and spending every waking moment together. Something to keep in mind is that the first 5 years of life are referred to as the formative years. These are the years in which a child experiences rapid cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development. In these first 5 years of life, experiences and relationships actually stimulate a child's development. It makes millions of connections in their brains, and they develop these connections faster in the first 5 years than at any other time in their entire lives. This is the time when the foundations for learning, health, and behavior throughout life are laid down. The reason I'm mentioning this is because with two very young children close in age to raise at the very same time, one that's biological and one that's adopted, there is a chance that parents' attention can be split between the two. Though it may not be on purpose, it may be easier and more natural to focus more attention on the biological child. Most times, after giving birth, a newborn needs a lot of attention from their mother. They need the skin-to-skin contact, the breastfeeding, the coddling, whereas an adopted child that's already an infant or toddler is past those stages. It's a delicate balance. Bonding takes time, and it may be harder for an adoptive parent to feel the same bond with their adopted child. It's no fault of their own. It's merely how we are wired. This is not to say an adoptive parent won't and can't love their adopted child just as much, if not more, than their biological children. The other child who never got to bond with their own biological mother may feel that lack of attention, even though it's only subconscious. Some adopted children experience what's known as attachment trauma. According to BrightQuest treatment centers, attachment trauma is a disruption in the important process of bonding between a baby or child and their primary caregiver. It can be as simple as a lack of attention or affection, though the consequences of attachment trauma are far-reaching and long-lasting. Matthew had been abandoned. He never attached to a biological mother. He was given to nurses, then to the state, and eventually to foster care, and finally to Dawn and Richard. A friend of the family, Susan Whitaker, said that Dawn was a nearly perfect parent. She was willing to lay down her life for Matthew and Joshua. The family spent 8 years living in Hohokus, New Jersey. It's a quaint, little tight-knit town in Bergen County. The population 10 years ago was only a little over 4,000 people. It's primarily an upper-class and upper-middle-class community, and it's known to be one of the best places to live in New Jersey. From a young age, it was apparent that the Heikola boys were very different, not only in the way that they looked, with Matt having dark brown hair, olive skin, and dark, almost black eyes, and Josh with blonde hair, fair skin, and big blue eyes, but also different in the way they acted. Matt was very quiet and preferred to be by himself, whereas Josh was happy, always smiling, and seemed to like being close to his family and friends. A neighbor and very good friend from right across the street, Mrs. Schaefer, came running over to the Heikolas with her newborn daughter, just a few weeks old, in her arms, holding Matt, only 2, firmly by the wrist, with her 4-year-old Kenny in tow. The mother was furious, and she told Dawn that Matt had stuffed her newborn's mouth full of rocks. Though frightened and upset, Dawn and Mrs. Schaefer chalked it up to the boys innocently playing, and sometimes the playing got out of hand, especially when Matt was around. During summer camp, when Matt was only 4, the director pulled Dawn aside to let her know he was really hard for the counselors to handle. He had actually bitten and kicked a little girl, and months earlier he had been abusive to her little brother, who was a preschool classmate of Matt. She explained that Matt was always picking fights with kids, and he seemed to be aggressive for no reason. Dawn insisted she was going to take care of it, but it didn't seem to change anything. His behavior just seemed to get worse. The next summer, a mother called to let Dawn know that Matt had stabbed her son in the stomach with a pitchfork while they were playing in the backyard. I'm thinking, who's watching these kids? Though Dawn was not concerned, she thought boys will be boys. In 1979, Richard's research took him to the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, so his family moved to Bernards Township. It's known as a charming town, rich with history, breathtakingly beautiful scenery, and a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The residents are known for their community spirit and volunteerism. It sounds like somewhere you would live in a fairy tale. The Heikolas moved into a big, 3,000-square-foot, 2-story home with 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a recreation room, a fireplace, and a spacious, gorgeous front porch, great for morning coffee in a rocking chair. They had a 2-tiered wooden back deck, which was perfect for entertaining, and a basketball hoop at the end of their driveway. It was a dream home and ideal for the boys and their parents. The Heikolas fit right in, and they became very popular in their neighborhood of Basking Ridge. They were known to invite anyone and everyone over to their large, beautiful home for barbecues. Neighbors recall the family would even come over to everyone's houses and sing Christmas carols during the holidays. There was one neighbor, though, that had a little bit of a different perspective. His name was Chris Schmidt. He met the family when Matt was about 10, and he said there was something off about him. He was really quiet, too quiet, and he would stare at you and say nothing. It seemed like he was staring right through you. Chris said he just seemed different, and it was around this time that Matthew's problems became more apparent. Richard was gone a lot for his job, and his hard work actually paid off. He was awarded the Javits Neuroscience Award in 1987. It's one of the most prestigious awards granted by the National Institutes of Health. From the outside looking in, the Heikolas seemed to have the perfect all-American family. Don't they always? As the boys got older and were in school full-time, Dawn began to study to obtain her real estate license and eventually started working as a realtor in their wooded, upscale suburb. It didn't take long for Dawn to become very successful, but that meant less time devoted to the boys. This may have affected Matt because, when he was only 12, he was already getting in trouble with the law. He was rebelling. The police were sent to the Heikolas' house to confront Matt and his parents about Matt riding a dirt bike illegally on a road near their house. A neighbor was outside later that afternoon, and she actually heard Dawn crying in the backyard. She went over there and asked her if everything was okay. Dawn admitted she was stressed. She didn't know what to do. She could not handle Matthew. The neighbor comforted her and told her it was probably a phase and Matt would likely grow out of it. Unfortunately, not much changed. It seemed like Matt wasn't scared of punishment or authority. Visits by the police became more and more frequent and more serious over the years. Dawn and Richard tried their very best. They knew Matt was troubled, but they didn't understand where his anger was coming from. However, there was a common theme. He was extremely jealous of Josh. It started pretty early on, when the boys were around kindergarten age. Yes, brothers can be jealous of one another. Maybe one gets a better toy for Christmas, the other one maybe gets a better seat on an airplane, that sort of thing. But this wasn't normal sibling rivalry. Matt would throw full-on temper tantrums when he wasn't getting enough attention. He would get in fights with Josh, screaming that his parents didn't love him. They had not told Matt that he was adopted, but kids are smart and they can sense things. Matt would continuously ask his family why he did not look like them. But they lied to him. They continued to make excuses, like he inherited his father's genes. It wasn't a secret for long. Once Matt knew the real story about how Dawn and Richard had longed for their own child before adopting Matt, he felt like he didn't have a purpose within the family. Once Josh, the miracle child, was born, Matt felt he was old news. Matthew would purposely separate himself from his family, and it made it really hard to bond with him. It was also really hard for him to make friends at school, so he became more and more antisocial. It didn't help that Josh never got in trouble. Maybe it was by nature, or maybe he saw the way Matt was acting, and he was learning from his big brother's mistakes. But this only made Matt angrier, because it seemed like Josh could do no wrong. While Matt's teachers were having conferences with his parents about him being out of control in class, Josh's teachers were sending home letters praising Joshua, how smart, well-behaved, and talented he was. It seemed it was true, though. Richard, Dawn, and Josh were all overachievers by nature. They liked things tidy and organized. Matt, he just tried to get by with mediocre grades. His room was always a mess. He was just different. Josh was also very tall. He was athletic and won many awards for his athleticism. Matt was shorter. He had no coordination. He didn't excel at sports, unless committing crime is considered a sport. When the boys were still in elementary school, the parents took classes to learn how to deal with Matthew's behavior. Despite their very best efforts to treat the boys the same, Matt still believed they favored Josh. no matter what they did. There were times when Josh would instigate Matthew, but it was only when the boys were already fighting and at odds. In these moments, the fact that Matt was adopted did get thrown around in petty arguments, but it affected Matt way deeper than anyone could have imagined. Matt did grow up to become a handsome teenage boy. He had a big white smile, dimples in his cheeks, and he certainly had one talent: attracting females. While Josh was focused on church, school, and sports, Matthew had that bad boy sex appeal. In school, Matt got a lot of attention from girls. He seemed thrilling to them at first, but many of the relationships wouldn't last long because they usually found some kind of flaw in him. Whether it was his pathological lying, his stealing, or his failing grades, he just wasn't right for them. That didn't stop women from falling for him, though, because he had this ability to come off as very charismatic and charming. He was still getting in trouble, though, so the family tried counseling together. They loved Matthew, they just didn't know how to prove it to him. They tried medications and behavioral therapy, and even decided to have Matt go through programs at a few psychiatric facilities. They thought this might change some of his bad habits and hopefully get through to him. One thing that friends of the family noticed, though, was that the Heikolas were very lenient on the boys. They would let Matt's behavior slide all the time, but also noted that Dawn had tried disciplining Matt too, and it seemed like it had no effect on his behavior either way. All the counseling and treatments were very expensive, and it didn't seem to help. However, it did prove that Matt never felt like he fit in anywhere, including his own home. He told one psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Sadoff, that he could tell there was favoritism towards Josh, and he couldn't get over it. I really wish Matt could have found his identity through something else. It seems like he was so invested in this identity as it related to his family, but he was old enough to make a life for himself aside from all of that as he became an adult. However, you will learn more about the reasons he was unable to do so, most of which had to do with addiction. The Heikolas feared if they didn't do something more, Matt could go even more astray. They transferred him to a private high school called Bailey Ellard in Madison for a year. They were hoping these teachers would give him one-on-one attention, but it didn't help. Matt ended up dropping out of school. He did end up earning his GED, but Josh, on the other hand, graduated valedictorian of his senior class. Josh even appeared in the Morris County newspaper, along with an article he was interviewed for. It read, "The class valedictorian, Joshua Heikola, said throughout his high school education, he grew and learned to look at people openly." He added, "People have special talents that make them great." I wonder if Josh looked hard enough to see anything good about his own brother. One of Joshua's favorite quotes was printed in the yearbook under his senior picture, and it said, "One ought every day at least once to hear a little song, read a good poem, see a fine picture, and if possible, to speak a few reasonable words." Matt's was, "Sometimes you have to lose to win." When Matt was 18, he was arrested after he tried to impersonate a police officer. He grabbed someone at the mall, put their hands behind their back, and handcuffed them. That same year, he faced contempt of court charges, and 1 year later, at only 19, he already had several warrants out for vehicular violations. The fact that the Heikolas knew Matt was jealous and felt like he was second best led them to overcompensate. They hardly ever punished him for his bad behavior, thinking he was just acting out because he needed more attention. Instead of disciplining him, they would almost praise him after these incidents. For that moment when he was in trouble, he would get his parents' full attention. They couldn't just ignore him when the police were standing at their door. Things started to really go downhill for Matt after high school. He was still living at home, but didn't follow any rules. He'd be out all night partying and taking drugs, specifically Valium in large doses, possibly to numb his pain and forget that he didn't belong. Matthew's relationships with women were also out of control. He had a huge issue with abandonment, and if a woman tried to dump him, he would become unhinged. He would threaten to take his own life or even theirs. Women felt trapped. They didn't want to be with him once they noticed his true colors, but they were too terrified to leave. Matt had the ability to fake being very friendly at first, and the fact that he came from a wealthy family helped because he would buy them gifts and take them on trips, often using his family's credit card without their permission. Most of the time, Matt did not have his own money. He just jumped from one odd job to the next. Meanwhile, Josh was applying to Ivy League colleges and getting his father's praise and attention all the time. This, of course, caused Matt to have a growing hatred towards Richard. In the summer of 1988, the family gathered around the dinner table. Dawn walked over and handed Josh an envelope addressed to him from Dartmouth. He had applied months earlier, and they were about to find out if he got in. It was an exciting moment in Josh's life, and for anyone who worked as hard as he did. It was also an exciting moment for his parents. Matt just couldn't let Josh enjoy this moment. He kept telling him to open the stupid envelope already and made rude remarks like, "It's not a big deal. Why would anyone want to go there anyway? I hate school. We all know Mr. Perfect got into Dartmouth, so why are we even standing around like it's some kind of big surprise? Just open it up so we can move on and eat." Super rude and inconsiderate, of course. His parents were excited for Josh and wouldn't let Matt ruin that moment. Josh did get accepted, and they all cheered, so happy for him. Except for Matt, who sat there stone cold. Instead of being happy for his brother, he turned around and stormed off. In the summer of 1989, when Matt was 19, he started dating a girl from Ecuador. By November, he asked her to marry him. She said that she had to ask her parents for permission, so he used his parents' credit card, and they took a trip to Ecuador. However, his girlfriend's parents forbade her to marry Matt after finding out he had lied about his age. He claimed he was 24 when he was only 19. Matt was livid. Instead of dealing with his emotions in a mature, healthy manner, he reacted poorly. Matt tried to take his life by swallowing painkillers and shooting Valium into his veins. He was rushed to the hospital, and they ended up saving his life. He flew home, and guess who was waiting for him at the airport? Dawn and Richard. They checked him in at Overlook Hospital for treatments, but he escaped. A nurse was trying to stick a syringe into his arm, and he violently ripped it out and ran. That night, he never came home. He slept over at a friend's house, and he was running with a bad crowd, so he was back abusing drugs. His drug abuse ended up leading to full-on hallucinations. He was super paranoid, and he told doctors and his family that a Colombian drug dealer was after him. This is what led him to purchase a handgun for protection. He paid $650 for a Beretta. Here he is, mentally unstable, and now he has a weapon. Not a good combo. On December 3, 1989, Matt called the Bernards Township Police, saying that someone was after him. The police called Richard and told him, "You need to come home and tend to your son." His dad was super embarrassed because, at this point, Dawn and Richard were prominent figures in their community. Most people in the neighborhood did not like Matt. They got a bad feeling about him. They knew he was unstable, but it was hard because they liked the Hakalas. Therefore, they were willing to accept Matt and, pretend there wasn't something wrong with him. Dawn was working for Bergdorf Realtors as a top saleswoman. She was also a member of the state's $1 Million Sales Club. Everyone seemed to know her because she sold most of the families their homes in Basking Ridge. At this point, Richard was highly respected. He was revolutionizing the research and treatment for Parkinson's disease. He, alongside his research team, produced extremely important studies that are still being used today. At the time, they were on the cutting edge of discovering what causes Parkinson's and how to treat it, and even close to possibly finding a cure. Richard truly was leading the research in these areas. Ironically, he was also studying brain injuries suffered by drug users. Yet, here he was, put off by Matt's addiction, and didn't want it to reflect poorly upon him, especially because he had just recently taken a position as a professor of neurology and pharmacology at the research institution. So he was new to this position and didn't want anything to tarnish his name. Dawn was always patient with Matt, but over the years, Richard had had enough. He came home from work that afternoon and confronted Matt about calling the police and his claims of being stalked. This is the moment Richard found out that Matt had a gun. Earlier that morning, Matt was rummaging through the house. He was looking for cash and credit cards and ended up stumbling upon a letter that was in Josh's room. It was written by his mother and sent to Josh last summer when Josh went away to summer camp. The minute Richard walked through the door, and before he could confront Matt about the call, Matt cornered him in the kitchen and was yelling at him over this letter. He insisted the letter proved everything he had suspected, that they loved and cared about Josh way more than him. His father told him not to be ridiculous. It was merely a letter, and had Matt been away at summer camp, they would have written him a letter too. Instead, Matt chose to be out getting in trouble, and it was his actions that put him in the position he was in. But Matt never took responsibility. He blamed his parents for everything that went wrong, and his life in this moment was no different. He starts reading the letter out loud to his father, and he did it in this condescending manner. "Dear Josh, your father and I want you to know we are so happy that you made National Honor Society. So, Anytime Richard tried to interrupt and explain away each part of the letter, Matt would yell at him to shut up. He would move closer and closer to Richard, and he just kept reading the letter. But what we're most proud of is the fact that you're turning out to be a caring, responsible, and kind person. As Matt was reading the letter, his anger was getting more and more out of control, and he moved closer and closer. He got right up into his dad's face, and he was so close he was spitting on his dad while he was yelling. Richard was trying to keep calm, and Matt just kept saying, "You don't love me. You don't care about me. You never had." And he wanted Richard to say to his face, to finally admit he didn't love Matt. Instead, Richard was still trying to tell him how much they did love him. It didn't help. Matt grew increasingly irritated, and he kept screaming in Richard's face to stop interrupting him. That's when he pulled out the Beretta. He pointed it at Richard and screamed for him to shut up and listen. Richard put his hand up in front of his face and said, Okay, I'm listening. Please stop," he said. "I love you. Your mother loves you. Josh loves you." But right when Richard uttered the name Josh, Matt cocked the gun and came closer to him. He told him, "If you say the name Josh one more time, I will blow your head off." Richard told him he would never say it again. Then Matt took the gun and started to point it at himself and threatened to take his own life. Richard saw this opportunity to grab the cordless phone that was sitting on the kitchen counter, and he called 911. Matt was still screaming at the top of his lungs and saying how embarrassing it would be for the community to find out that Matt took his life because his family never loved him. Richard was on the phone with a 911 operator, and he was quickly trying to tell the operator that his son had a gun and was threatening him. All the while, the operator could hear Matt in the background. They could hear Matt asking his dad how it would feel if he blew his head off, and the family would have to sit down in this kitchen, knowing that his brains had been scattered all over the place. He once again pointed the gun at Richard, but heard the operator say that the police would be there any minute. Matt was no stranger to the police, so he gave up and walked away. Richard was still on the phone, and he was scared that Matt really was going to take his own life, so he started chasing after him. Matt made it to the front door, and all of a sudden, you hear shots ringing out, one after the other, after the other. Richard was sure that Matt was dead, so he yelled into the phone, "Send paramedics." When he got outside, he saw Matt shooting up the Toyota Corolla that they had purchased for him when he turned 16. Matt ended up putting 13 bullets into his own car. He was arrested and taken into custody, and the Hikalas begged the police not to charge him with anything. Instead, they said, "Please admit him to the Carrier Clinic, a private psychiatric hospital." But against his parents' wishes, the police charged him with making terroristic threats against Richard, and bail was set at $25,000. Get this, his parents, of course, bailed him out, but then they actually hired a defense attorney to help get the charges dismissed and prove drug-induced insanity. It worked. Of course it did. When you have the money and can afford a good defense attorney, sometimes you can get away with things. When he was in the institution, he admitted to Dr. Sadoff that when he went back to Ecuador, he watched the movie Back to the Future, and this is when he thought that Arab terrorists were coming after him, driving a Volkswagen minibus. And that's what set all this into motion. I wanted to laugh, but then I have to stop and remind myself that this is real to Matthew. As much as it seems funny to us, when an individual is having these delusional hallucinations, it is real to them. The agreement with the court was if he could stay off drugs and continue counseling, he could be released. The doctor told his parents that his prognosis would be good if he could stay away from street drugs. Matt was released after 6 weeks. His parents thought perhaps getting a job would encourage him to change and bring in some extra money for him to attempt to support himself and move on in life. This way, he would become a stable adult. But the added pressure of holding down a job and the rules that it entailed put him into another tailspin. One afternoon, his parents found him unresponsive on the floor of his bedroom. This time they admitted him to Somerset Medical Center, and he stayed there for 2 weeks. After this episode, he told doctors he didn't remember anything, including when he threatened his dad with the Beretta. Doctors told his parents that he may have carried out some of his actions because he had psychotic paranoid delusions plus auditory hallucinations. He couldn't think clearly. He wasn't a healthy, rational person. He did not understand or appreciate the danger of his actions because of his paranoid fears. I always think it must be scary for someone to almost be trapped inside their mind, to not know that they're not stable, to be living in this alternate reality. Doctors said that Matt should be treated as mentally ill and be prescribed antipsychotic medications, rather than trying to treat him as a criminal. They said he should not be allowed to possess any substances or weapons, since his actions were not based in reality. The doctors feared he was going to fatally hurt someone or himself. It seemed like the Hikalas didn't heed this warning. In the next few weeks, the clinic had let them know no one was making sure that Matt stayed on track. No one was monitoring him or whether he was attending the clinic for routine treatment and staying off drugs. On one hand, I'm sitting here thinking, yes, his parents should have been on top of that, but he's an adult. However, he's also classified as mentally ill. So does that mean he falls back under his parents' responsibility? Doctors weren't the only ones who warned the Hikola family that Matt was capable of fatally injuring someone. Police told Richard after the incident with the Beretta that he had to follow through and do something with a more severe punishment, like jail, or Matt was going to kill you both. Neither parent believed that. They thought he just needed to learn a little more responsibility. So, with his parents' help and their connections in the community, he landed a pretty decent job as a desk clerk at the Madison Hotel in Morris Township. They even bought him a brand new Jeep so he could drive there for his shifts. But a couple of weeks later, he totaled it, flipped it while he was speeding. It frustrates me, I can't help it. Nevertheless, considering some of the other bad things that had happened before, things started to seem like they were looking up. Matt was on a pretty normal schedule. He was waking up on his own, going to work, meeting new people, making new friends, and he was also dating again. He was with 19-year-old Melanie Glover, who was from about an hour away in Long Branch. Not sure where they met, but in the fall of 1990, she got pregnant. The problem was, Matt was being unfaithful. He was seeing another girl that he was working with at the hotel in October. Her name was Marta Morales, and we will talk about her in a moment. He told his pregnant girlfriend, Melanie, that he was in love with someone else, saying, "You can keep the baby, but I'm out of here." Who was this new girl, Marta, that he was in love with? She was a lovely girl. Her mother was an immigrant from Mexico, very hardworking, and she taught Marta to do the same. She was smart and was attending St. Elizabeth's University, a private Catholic school in Morris Township, on a scholarship. Marta was so happy dating Matt. He was her first serious boyfriend. She even introduced him to her mother, which was a pretty big deal, and her mom thought he was a really nice boy but hoped Matt wouldn't be a distraction from her studies. Marta's mother was very strict, and for whatever reason, that made an impression on Matt. He always acted very respectfully towards Marta's mom, and it wasn't an act. He actually held her in high regard. He didn't want to make any mistakes, especially because he was in love with her daughter. He always had Marta home on time and spoiled her with gifts. She really thought she had found the one, a man who was going to help her achieve her goal of living the American dream. The Hikolas were also very happy. They really thought Matt was on the straight and narrow until one afternoon in mid-December 1990. Richard received a call from the Morris Township Police Department. They informed Richard that Matt had stolen $900 from the hotel and had just been fired. He was charged with theft, and they were holding him until Richard picked him up from the police station. Richard couldn't believe it because, unlike Dawn, he doubted Matt would ever be able to live a life void of trouble. When Richard came to get Matt, Matt claimed he didn't do it, that the hotel didn't like him, and they were pinning this on him to get rid of him. The Hikolas said, "We do not care. You're going to have to get another job because you need to pay back the hotel for what you did." That was perfect because he needed extra money anyway. Christmas was getting closer, and Matt had been promising Marta they would spend the night in a 5-star hotel, order room service in the morning, and he'd get her any gift she wanted. He didn't have enough money, so he asked his mom if he could borrow some. She agreed and asked him, "How much do you need? Is $100 enough?" Matt just laughed hysterically. "Mom, come on, it's more like a couple of thousand," he said. His mom was shocked. She said, "I can't do that. It's far too much to spend on a girl you've just started dating a couple of months ago." Besides, she mentioned Richard would find out. What do you think happens? Matt goes ballistic. He's screaming at Dawn, asking her why she's so scared of Richard. He tells her, "Think for yourself. Stop letting him make decisions for you." Matt had no choice but to take a job as a cashier at a gas station, which was 30 minutes outside of his community where he wasn't well known. Can you guess? Yeah, it didn't last long. On Christmas Eve, only a couple of weeks into his night shift, he was apprehended by Summit police. He was questioned in connection to a report from the owner that he stole $3,000 from the safe, as well as a recent break-in at a home nearby. I guess he was trying to get that money for Marta's presents. This time, Matt was held in jail for over 10 hours until his parents came to bail him out. Richard wanted to teach Matt a lesson, but Dawn kept begging to go get him. When the police led Matt out to see his parents, Richard didn't even know what to say. He was speechless. Finally, he said to Matt, "You committed a felony, and it carries a 5-year prison sentence." Matt laughed, sarcastically responding with, Yeah, Dad, but you have one thing wrong. I had nothing to do with it." He's always blaming everything on other people, but he insisted if Richard would just take a look at the facts, instead of listening to the false narratives that cops were trying to spin about him, then maybe Richard would see that Matt was innocent. Richard couldn't take it anymore. He was just so damn condescending, and it's frustrating that he won't just act like an adult. Richard started to become angry, raising his voice right inside the police headquarters. He said, "I am looking at the facts, and the fact is you are always getting in trouble." Dawn jumped up, getting right in the middle of both of them. She looked at Richard and told him to stop it. Then she put her hands around Matt's face, stroking his cheek and comforting him, saying, "I'm so sorry you had to spend so many hours in jail." While she was doing this, Matt looked over at his dad and said, "Yeah, Dad, don't you care that I've been locked up for so long for something I didn't do? Why are some people just so easy to want to punch in the face?" Dawn was hugging Matt, and she said, "Honey, do you want to go back to Somerset? That was the psychiatric facility." Matt just lashed out at her, accusing her of saying he's crazy. He said, "Are you just trying to send me back to some kind of insane asylum and lock me up forever so you can forget about me and enjoy your life with your real son, Josh?" It was extremely frustrating because Matt was always misinterpreting things. "He just angers me so much." Matt figured he would make up for his inability to wine and dine Marta for Christmas and told her he would spoil her for her 20th birthday, which was on January 29th. The plan was for Marta to go to Mexico, visit with her family a couple of weeks before, then come back and celebrate together. Marta went away and Matt was a wreck. He kept calling and calling and calling, not leaving her alone. She's out enjoying time with her cousins and her friends on her vacation, and he just would not let up, constantly accusing her of sleeping with other men. But the truth was, she lost her virginity to Matt. Oh, and he took pride in that. He would bring it up again and again, almost using it against her, kind of like he owned her. On January 10th, he hangs up on her. He called her a name and once again accused her of being unfaithful. He goes out and purchases a double-barrel 20-gauge shotgun. The next day, he drove over an hour to Melanie's, his pregnant ex's house, and he begs her to marry him. Is this as confusing to you? Because to me, he has this huge fear of abandonment, so much so that he goes back to his ex while assuming Marta is cheating, only for Melanie to completely turn him down. So he goes back to the car, grabs the shotgun, points it in her face and tells her, "You better get an abortion and never tell anyone that we dated or I'll kill you." Unbelievable. Marta returned the following week, and Matt acted like nothing happened, like he didn't call her names, and he just apologizes for accusing her of cheating. He just says, "I just love you so much. It's so hard for me for you to be away. It just makes me crazy." And he's so sorry. Marta hadn't dated before, so she had no experience and didn't know what love was. This wasn't love, it was abuse. He was so manipulative, so much so the next time she was over, he shows her the shotgun and tells her, "If you ever leave me, I'll blow my head off." I cannot imagine the fear and guilt that I'd be carrying around, thinking I may be the reason someone that I love takes their life. That's a big burden for a young girl, or just anyone to have to bear. On Monday, January 28, Marta was worried. She calls Dawn and explains she's concerned for Matt. He's been locked up in his room the whole weekend. He's probably on drugs, and he could hurt himself. She doesn't tell his mom about the shotgun, though. Maybe she would have taken it just a tad more seriously had Marta admitted that. Dawn attempts to talk to Matt through the door, but he tells her he just needs to get a gift for Marta. It's her birthday, and he didn't have any money, and he needed to borrow some, so he's back with this again. Dawn gave him the same answer as last time, and she left for work. The next morning, Dawn knocked on the door to his room once again to check on him. This time, she could hear him crying. He was more vulnerable, and he begs her to stay with him. He says he needs her. He's so depressed. He's scared that he might do something stupid and hurt himself. Instead of stopping everything and giving Matt attention, she tells him she's going to be late to a meeting with a client, so she's gotta hurry and leave. Matt's emotions are all over the place. He's mad, he's sad, he feels abandoned once again. He's trapped and doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have money, he's depressed, everything is becoming too much. Not all of us have the same coping skills. Matt goes to the window and he's just watching his mother drive away, thinking that she doesn't really love him. Work was more important than her son. One person cared though, Marta, and today was her 20th birthday, January 29, 1991. He decides to cheer up and keep his promise. He got excited for what the night would bring. There was one problem. He didn't have money or a car, but he thought of a plan to get what he wanted. Matt made reservations at the famous Windows of the World restaurant, located on the 107th floor atop the World Trade Center in New York City. He calls Marta and tells her he would pick her up at 7 o'clock. Look how breathtaking this restaurant was. To think that it all fell to the ground on September 11th is so sad. The dinners here were from $30 to $50, not including dessert or anything else you wanted, and it definitely wasn't cheap. As honored as Marta was when she realized where Matt had taken her, she kept asking how in the world he was able to afford this. He just smiles and tells her she's worth it. He's complimenting her excessively about how beautiful she looked and how gorgeous she was. But then he brings up the cheating. In such a beautiful moment, he just can't help himself. It catches Marta off guard. She's instantly annoyed and upset and frustrated, and she once again tries to explain to him she did not cheat. She looks him in the eye and tells him, "You just imagined all that. It never happened." I'm sure he did not like that. Only Matt's reality matters though. He goes on to tell her that he can't be away from her. She's just so gorgeous. Then, in a manipulative manner, he says, "What do you expect? Do you blame me for not wanting to lose you?" And this puts it back on her. It can make you feel guilty for getting upset, so he transfers the blame once again. They're getting ready to leave, and he tells her he has one more surprise for her, and that this one is really going to blow her mind. She is so excited she can't wait. She already feels like a princess. They finally get in the car. Marta can't wait to get her surprise. It's around 11 o'clock when they pull up to Matt's house, and she's never been over this late before, so she's scared that his parents are gonna see them, sneaking in. Matt assures her she doesn't have to worry about his parents. He tells her to close her eyes, take his hand, not to peek, and follow him upstairs. They get up to the second floor where the rec room was, and Matt told Marta she could look now. It was dim in the room, and at first Marta didn't see anything. She looks over at Matt, puzzled, but then she follows his gaze to the floor, and that's when she saw it. Her brain couldn't process what her eyes were looking at. She can't contain herself, and she lets out this blood-curdling scream. It's a scream of horror and disgust and disbelief because there, on the rec room floor, is Matt's mother, or at this point, what's left of Matt's mother. She was completely unrecognizable. Her lifeless body is covered in blood, and Marta is so confused. So she's looking at Matt, and she's screaming, "That's your mother, Matt! Oh my God!" And he's just staring blankly ahead like catatonic, and he says, "It is. Are you surprised? That's what a shotgun does to your head. Boom. Bye-bye, Mom." Matt started to walk towards Marta, and he says, "What's wrong, baby? Don't you like it? Well, don't worry. I have another surprise waiting for you." He didn't want her to run, so he took out a pair of handcuffs. He gets one handcuff on her, but she runs. She tries to make her way out from the basement, and that's when she saw Matt's father. His overcoat was still on. He never had a chance to make it all the way inside the house before Matt shot him in the back of the head with the same sawed-off shotgun he used on Dawn. Marta is stunned. She's hyperventilating, she's trapped, she's sick to her stomach, she's gagging, and she's completely terrified. I can't imagine realizing that the person I thought I loved is an evil, heartless maniac, and all along I thought he would be my future. It would be as if my future was flashing before my eyes and out like a light. She screamed and screamed. She was shaking on the floor. At this point, he starts making fun of Richard as he's lying there. His life was stolen from him after all he had given Matt, and he's mocking him. It hurts for me to even repeat this, but he was saying things like, "Who's the boss now, Dad? You're not so powerful and smart anymore, are you?" Then he turns and looks straight at Marta and says, "You're next." She makes it upstairs, and he pushes her into Josh's room. He throws her on the bed, and he tells her he can't possibly let her go after all she has seen. Then he looks at her with these black, evil, blank eyes. He tells her there are a lot of reasons she needs to die tonight. One is that she's a liar. He loved her, but she never loved him. He wanted her to say it, to say that she loved him, to beg for her life. She was too stunned to even speak, and he just kept going, just screaming in her face. spitting on her as he yelled at her. He told her this would never have happened if she hadn't cheated on him. She tried again to defend herself, but there was no arguing or reasoning with a murderous sociopath. He has to be right, and the more you try to deny his reality, the angrier he becomes. He says there's no other excuse for her not answering the phone at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. Where was she? Where could she have been? He's holding onto her arms, shaking her. She's bawling, shaking, nauseous, and she is in utter shock. She's trying to get the courage to mutter, "I was sleeping, Matt," but he's got a one-track mind, and the only thing that's on it is murder. I feel so bad for her. He tells her none of them loved him, that they're all liars. He opens up his closet, reaches inside, and pulls out the shotgun. He points it at her. She's crawling across the bed. He comes towards her slowly, the gun held right in her face. He told her he wanted her to die with good memories, and that's why he took her out to a nice time, knowing that it would be her very last night on Earth. She was begging him to spare her life. She told him, "I love you so much, so much. Even after everything I saw, I still love you." All the while she is saying this with a shotgun in her face at point-blank range. This woman is so strong. She is so courageous. To think she had to use all the strength in her not to look like she was lying. She knew she had one chance to try to save herself. She slowly puts her hands up in front of her face, while tears are just still running right down her cheeks, and she just softly asks him to please put the gun down and talk to her. There was just this silence. He stood there in silence. Imagine not knowing what this man is going to do to you. How much time do you have left? To her surprise, he slowly let the weapon fall to the floor. Then he sits down next to her on the bed. At this point, he asks her to put her arms out straight in front of her. Of course, she complies, and he handcuffs her right arm to his left arm. She can't escape. He proceeds to tell her that after everything he's accomplished that day, he's exhausted and needs to get some sleep. This poor young girl has been tricked, lied to, manipulated, and has just witnessed not one but two deceased people. She was almost killed, and now she has to sleep with the man responsible. She knew this. For now, she was still alive, even if it meant she only had one more hour on this earth. Even if it was just to feel the warmth of a bed for the very last time, or smell her perfume, or look around at this gorgeous home that became an early grave for Matt's parents. Anything was worth having more time, even pretending to love a monster. He turned the lights out, shotgun by his side, pulled the covers over them, cuddled up next to her, and fell right to sleep. Not Marta. She had to use all of her strength not to scream, cry, or try to run because our instinct is to survive, to retreat. But she had to be smart. She couldn't relax. There was no way she could sleep. She thought he could wake up at any moment, and that would be the end. All night, she's thinking of a way to convince Matt not to take her life. She knew what he was capable of. The next morning, Matt wakes up. He leans over toward her and unlocks the handcuffs. Obviously, they have to wash up. They have to go to the bathroom. He needs to as well. Just as she's walking toward the bathroom, he says, "Marta, don't do anything stupid." She can't help it though. As soon as she gets out of his sight, she locks the bathroom door behind her and falls to the ground on that cold tile and just hysterically cries. She also knows she can't waste any time. She's looking all over the room for a weapon or a way out. There's a window above the toilet, but it's pretty high up. She closes the lid and steps on top, stretching to reach the windowsill. She's pulling herself up high enough to reach the shutters. They have a latch on them, so she lowers herself back down and tries again. This time, she unhooks the latch. These shutters swing open so fast that they crash against the wall, making a really loud noise, and she knows Matt heard it. She can hear him somewhere in the bedroom, so she knows if he finds out that she's trying to escape, it is over. She tries to pull herself up again to get to the windowsill, but she slips. It's too far. She can't reach it. She can't balance and try to open at the same time. At that moment, he bangs on the door. She nearly falls on her face. He asks, "What's taking you so long?" She says, "I'm just using the toilet," so he tells her to hurry up. Now she realizes there is no way to escape. She has to walk out there and face him once again. She has a plan. She's hoping it's not too late to try one last thing. As soon as she comes out, she pretends to be happy to see him. She tells him how thankful she is that he took her to such a fabulous dinner and that she had the best birthday, pretending she doesn't even remember the other things that occurred that night. His face lights up. It's working. She tells him, "I'm so lucky to have you. You know, we should get away together." He stops and looks at her and he's like, "What do you mean we?" She repeats, "We together. Let's just get out of here. Let's fly to Jamaica." Jamaica was a place that Matt really enjoyed. He had stolen his dad's credit cards in the past and stayed there for a while. She tells him that no one will find them there and they can start a new life together. So, Marta tells him that no one will know them there. They can hurry and leave, starting a brand new life, just the two of them. He is standing there silently, staring at her for what seems like forever. Then he leans in and says, "Okay, we'll leave right now. We'll get to the airport and catch the very first flight out of here to Jamaica." Marta is trying to hold in her excitement because she can't believe it. She doesn't trust it yet because at any moment this could be another lie, another way to manipulate her, another way to trick her into thinking he may actually be a normal, kind, loving man. But she takes comfort in what he says for the moment because remember, she's still alive. For now, this buys her more time to figure out how to escape from this psycho. He tells her if she runs, he will kill her without a second of hesitation. She assures him she doesn't want to leave him and can't wait to start their new life together. That's survival right there. There's only one issue. Marta obviously didn't come prepared for a trip out of the country. She doesn't have her passport. She's so terrified, she has to tell Matt they need to stop by her house so she can run up to her room and get it, and then they can be on their way. Even if she's scared, that's the truth. His mood has changed, and she's shocked when he actually agrees. He seems happy, excited, and he's back to normal, whatever that means. They leave. 45 minutes later, they arrive at Marta's around 8 o'clock in the morning. Matt parks his mom's car, they get out, and he follows her inside. This evil man is only one step behind her. Remember, she hasn't been home all night since he picked her up over 12 hours ago. She hasn't spoken to her parents, nothing. When her mom hears them come through the door, of course, she rushes over to speak with them. Marta is terrified. If her parents get in Matt's way, he will do the same thing he did to his own parents, probably without even a moment of hesitation. She almost screams, but she knows she has to hold it together for the sake of her mother. He's already mouthing to her to keep her mouth shut. She tries to act completely normal. Matt was actually hoping Marta's parents wouldn't be home. He didn't want to have this confrontation. Remember that he respects Marta's mom. He doesn't want to look bad. His reputation still matters to him. Oddly and ironically, he's actually scared of Marta's mom. She's only 4'11". He's got a weapon in his car 50 feet away, but he stops in his tracks. She's also able to tell that something is not right. There is an unspoken message of fear and concern. With her motherly instincts, she could probably smell the tension in that room. She starts to yell at Marta. She asks her, "What are you doing home? You have class. Where were you all night? Why didn't you ever come home?" She turns to Matt and says, "Matthew, what is going on here? What are you doing here at this hour on a school day?" He's in his delusional state and starts telling Marta's mom that they're actually going on a birthday trip to Jamaica to celebrate Marta's birthday. She looks at him like he has 5 heads. She's like, "What? You cannot be serious, Matt." She begins to approach him. She's fearless, but then again, she has no idea what he has just done and how close she could be to death. She tells him to go home and tells Marta to go upstairs. Marta is just standing there trying to plead with her, but she's stern. She turns back to Matt once again and tells him it's time for him to leave. Marta knows that any second Matt is going to lose it. Her heart is pounding because she can see his jaw tightening up, his fists rolled up into balls, his eyes piercing through her mother. Time seems to be going by so slowly until Matt lets out a breath and says, "Fine, I'll go." Shocked, Marta watches him start to turn around. Then he stops. He comes back over to her and whispers in her ear, "I should have blown your head off when I had the chance," then turns back around and swiftly walks right out the door. I'm shocked too, but what might not be apparent is that Matt wasn't used to someone challenging him. His parents never stood up to him like that. Matt could easily manipulate everyone around him, but inside, he was truly a weak coward. He was no mental match for Marta's mom. As soon as the door closes, Marta falls to the ground, hysterically crying. Her mom shuts the door and locks it. Marta can't breathe, can't get out a word. She's absolutely inconsolable. But before she can even tell her mom what happened, the phone rings, and Marta jumps up, startled. She lets out a scream and runs to pick it up. She knew it was Matt from his mother's car phone outside. He threatens to kill her and her whole family if they call the police. She stays quiet, lies to her mom, and says they broke up, which is why she's so upset. That day was Wednesday, and while all of this is going on, a few of Dawn's co-workers notice that she's late to a meeting with one of her clients. They try to call her on the car phone, and that's when they knew something wasn't right because Matt was forbidden to drive his mother's new Audi. Matt makes up a story, saying Josh has been in a terrible car accident and the whole family was driving to the university right now. Her co-workers were not buying it. Remember, people knew Matt wasn't well. They weren't stupid. They didn't like him. They drive over to the house, and a note is on the door with the same message in Matt's handwriting. It just seemed off. Why wouldn't the Hakalas just call and explain? The friends called the police, and then the police also called the university to find out what's going on. What's crazy is that Josh was supposed to be on his way home the day before. Yeah, wow. The police were now inside the Hikalas' house, where they discovered the carnage at 2:20 p.m. Matt was nowhere to be found. What was found were 2 shotgun shells, etched into their soft metal with precision, with the word Mom on one of them and Dad on the other. You cannot say after seeing that this was not premeditated. I'm going to tell you more of the details about what exactly happened later. Marta had stayed quiet, like Matt requested, and it wasn't until an APB was put out for Matt that a police officer recognized him and knew that he was dating Marta. He alerts the police, and they arrive at her house and attempt to question her, but at first she wouldn't speak. I probably wouldn't either. She couldn't speak. She was still in shock. They didn't know what happened to her. They had no idea what she had been through, and they didn't find out until she felt safe. They told her, "There are a ton of police cars outside. You're gonna be okay." She finally admits to them what happened that night, and then she says, "He's probably on his way to Jamaica." On Thursday morning, police locate the 1989 Audi at Newark International Airport. Later, they traced Matt's movements to a small town 60 miles away from Montego Bay. He had checked into a very small bed and breakfast called Miss Mary's Place. It did take 6 days, though, for Jamaican police to locate him, and by then, he had already settled down into his new life. He had been shopping, eating at nice restaurants, even grabbed drinks with a few women, all on his dead father's dime. Unfortunately for him, he left a really bad impression the last time he was there, and a cop remembered him from a moped accident when he saw the federal warrant out for his arrest. Now, he alerted the FBI, and they busted into Matt's hotel room and apprehended him on February 15, 1991. Somerset County grand jury indicted Matt, only 22 years old, on capital murder charges for the deaths of his parents, as well as kidnapping and attempted murder of Marta. He was in jail pending a $2.5 million bail. His poor parents were not there to bail him out this time. Both Josh and Marta were now in protective custody. As his trial began on November 12, 1992, a lot of details started to emerge, and I will share many of them with you. There was no question that Matt had killed his parents, but there was one thing that remained at issue, and that was whether he was insane or not. This was the same court and the same judge, Michael R. Imbriani, that found Matt not guilty by reason of insanity only a year earlier when he threatened to shoot his dad with the Beretta. Now, what if Matt had actually followed through? Wouldn't that mean his insanity was the cause? That's what the defense said. Shortly before his court appearance, Matt said he felt absolutely terrible for what happened. He wished he could talk to his parents. He said, "I was going to call my mom, but then I realized I couldn't. When I sit down and think about it, I freak out and my emotions run wild." Do you believe him? He also began writing letters while he was in jail. He wrote them to Josh, Marta, and also various news outlets. In one of the letters, which was for Fox News, he stated, "I guess the reason I did not kill Marta was because I did not have any shells left. I would have shot her in the stomach so I could watch her die a slow and painful death. She deserved it." Why does this young girl deserve that? Because he really thinks that she cheated on him. Even if she did, really? Then he goes on to brag about the fact that he once escaped a prison sentence because of being legally insane, and he was going to do it again. The jury was made up of 9 men and 3 women. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty because they claimed Matt ambushed his parents while robbing them, allegedly to attain the money in the car to take Marta out for her birthday. If that's not insane, I don't know what is. But aside from the legalities, everyone who knew Matt and his history knew this was not just about wanting to take his girlfriend out. The prosecution still needed a motive to get beyond the insanity defense, so they decided to claim felony murder, committing a homicide during a dangerous felony such as robbery, rape, arson, or kidnapping. This would justify the death penalty. It was better for the prosecution if the motive was money and not hatred for his adoptive parents, because then all the anticipated psychological testimony from the expert witnesses and counselors that treated Matt would become relevant. Circling back to the insanity plea. At trial, the details emerged. There was a videotape of the crime scene submitted as evidence, played for the entire courtroom. It was said to be surreal, like a home movie. It started with the beautiful suburban home, unwashed dishes in the sink, sports trophies lining the walls, and holiday decorations still here and there. Then the camera panned over to 2 dead bodies. There were also very graphic and up-close photos of the victims, including one of Dawn, that many people who loved her could not look at. It was so gruesome that you couldn't even make out what you were looking at. It just seemed like a whole bunch of raw meat. Only a third of her skull was left, and it was said that because of the damage, she was shot at point-blank range. It was also revealed that Matt had named the shotgun LB, short for Left Behind. The symbolism there is chilling. Police had found an undated handwritten note from Matt. The note said he originally planned to kill his girlfriend and then commit suicide, and that Marta wanted to die, and once she did, he couldn't go on. He explained this was a pact and this was a goodbye letter. He apparently tore up the letter and threw it away, but since it was eventually found in Dawn's things, the theory was she had found it, confronted him, and that's what led to the Haikala's deaths. The last words he said to each of his parents were, "I hate you," before pulling the trigger. He explained that he lured his parents home by telling them he was dating 2 women and got one of them pregnant, and he didn't know what to do. His mom arrived first, and he was hiding upstairs, waiting for her to come in looking for him, and that's when he ambushed her. His father came home later. Just 30 minutes later, Matt came up behind his father and ambushed him as well. Matthew also blamed the legal system for not giving him the treatment he needed after being found not guilty by reason of insanity in 1989. At one point, he even said, "I'm not a violent person." He told the judge that no one monitored him to make sure he was following through with his treatment plan, arguing, "If you would have followed through on the treatment plan, I would still have my family." He was literally blaming the judge. The court stated that it was Matt's responsibility to follow the court order, and he chose not to. It wasn't Richard and Don's fault. They did everything they could for Matthew. It wasn't a lack of love or trying on their part. The sole defense witness was a psychiatrist named Harry Brunt, who said that Matt was insane at the time of the killings and did not know right from wrong. He argued that Matt did not receive proper care growing up. Psychiatrist Kenneth Weiss rebutted this, saying that Matt did not have a mental illness but rather antisocial personality disorder. He argued that the insanity plea did not apply. Recall that Matt's parents were the ones to argue the insanity plea, not wanting him to get in trouble. However, the incident with his father was caused by his severe jealousy of Josh and his perceived inferiority to his whole family, corroborated by evidence. The jury did not buy the defense's arguments, finding Matthew guilty of 12 counts, including murder, kidnapping, robbery, making terroristic threats, and unlawful possession of a weapon. On January 14, 1993, Matthew learned that he would be facing the death penalty. Despite this, he believed his appeal would be successful, stating, "I will not die behind bars." During the penalty phase, the jury was left to decide whether Matthew would spend the rest of his life in prison or receive lethal injection. Judge Imbriani allowed testimony about adopted child syndrome, with a psychologist stating that Matt fit the profile, an adopted child filled with rage who doesn't have the opportunity to vent his feelings to his family. I feel like that's all he was ever doing. I'm going to define adopted child syndrome for you. It was very difficult for me to find a reputable source to truly understand what this was, so I'm using the best source I could find, the Journals of Contemporary Social Sciences. Adopted child syndrome has repeatedly surfaced to explain behaviors in adopted children that seem uniquely related to their adoptive status. Specifically, these include problems with bonding, attachment disorders, lying, stealing, defiance of authority, and acts of violence. The term really hasn't achieved acceptance within the professional community though, because there is a lack of data. There is a quote from Adopted Forensics by Dr. David Kirshner, PhD, that says, of the 500 estimated serial killers in the United States, 16 were adopted as children. He found that adoptees were 15 times more likely to kill one or both of their adoptive parents than biological children. So, there's that. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to 2 30-year terms with no possibility of parole. I thought it was odd that 10 out of 12 were voting in favor of the state's theory that Matt killed his father to cover up the murder of his mother, and then a lot of the people on the jury agreed with the defense as well, that he really did have issues from his past and being adopted, whether we think they're rational or not. It was clear he had issues with it. So on Thursday, February 25, 1993, Matthew was called a danger to others by the judge and ordered to be kept in prison until the age of 80. Judge Michael Imbriani stated, "Colt calculated and premeditated murders committed less than 1 hour apart of the two people who gave you more love than anyone else on this earth. They wanted you to cease acting like a spoiled child, to stop mooching off of their hard-earned money, and to start standing on your own 2 feet as an adult. You showed your appreciation by murdering them." Matt is serving the rest of his life sentence in Kentucky State Reformatory. He will turn 51 this year. Apparently, after being sentenced to life in prison, Matthew did find his birth parents, but he does go by a new last name. Maybe it's his biological parents' last name. He has a prison pen pal account if you do want to write him, and he says he's been a dog trainer since 2008 and he's in the process of completing his master's degree and will go on to pursue a PhD. He's a hopeless optimist who hopes to find someone who can accept him for who he is, not who he was years ago. But after he was put in prison, there were some things that were revealed from the other side. In 1994, the judge pleaded guilty to embezzling $173,000 from one of his legal partners. He received probation at the time, but then in 1996, he was found guilty again of evading taxes, and he was sentenced to 2 months in prison. He died in 2002. Also in 1996, the prosecutor, Nicholas Bissell Jr., was convicted for taking nearly $200,000 from a co-owned gas station. While awaiting his sentencing, he was out on bail. He was facing 10 years in prison, and he decided to flee. Sadly, he was later found in a hotel room in Vegas when the authorities were coming through the door. He took his own life. Matt's brother Josh became a missionary, and he has never spoken publicly about his parents' deaths. We want success, love, and happiness. But what happens when things don't go as planned? When truth becomes lies and revenge seems better when you're bitter? I would like to introduce you to Nyla Franklin. Nyla was born to a biochemist and businessman, Lee Franklin and Maria Manor, on April 12, 1979. Nyla was the center of attention from the day she was born. While still at the hospital, she became a very popular newborn. All the nurses all over Highland Park Hospital heard she was born with so much hair, they had to come and see it for themselves. They would stop by Maria's room to catch a glimpse, and some of them even tried stopping them when they were leaving the hospital just to get one last look. She really was a blessing to her family. The family lived in Chicago, Illinois, and Nyla grew up in a very loving family. They were involved in their children's lives. Her mother and father did get divorced, but they both continued to be involved with every child. Nyla's father spent time with Nyla every weekend and all summer. Nyla loved her family and was very close to everyone, especially her mother. Maria called Nyla her good luck charm. She said that everything she touched seemed to turn to gold. Nyla wasn't the only child. She had 4 sisters and a brother. Some of her siblings were half-siblings, and some of them were full siblings. However, they didn't differentiate themselves. They just called everyone sister or brother. I'm also from a blended family. The firstborn was Nyla's sister, Leah, who was 9 years older. She was like a second mother to all of the siblings. She got to watch each and every one of them grow up to be bright, well-rounded, and successful individuals, all with their own gifts. The siblings consisted of Leah, then Nyla, followed by Marina, who was born in May 1986. There were actually 2 girls named Ashley, born back-to-back, only a year apart, one Ashley with 2 E's at the end, and one Ashley with a Y. The youngest sibling was their brother John. They are a very talented family, each one of them having their own gifts that their mother and father cultivated and supported. Leah received a scholarship to Notre Dame, and she lives in San Francisco, California, with her husband and her 2 daughters. She's a marketing manager and an owner of a public relations firm. We're going to hear a lot about Leah in this story. Marina is actually a comedian and a pretty well-known one. She's an actress and a writer. Ashley with a Y is a nurse in Illinois with a family of her own. The other Ashley is a social worker. Each one of these women is beautiful and talented in their own ways. They look like such a loving and close-knit family, but what happens next really tears them apart. Nyla's younger siblings really looked up to her. It was her confidence, her intelligence, her go-getter attitude, and her caring heart. She would also tell it like it is. She wouldn't sugarcoat anything. So if you really wanted to know if the guy you were dating was a catch, she would be the first one to point out the red flags. She was as generous as she was blunt. Her family was her #1 priority. She was the first one that her sisters would turn to if they needed advice on anything. Nyla's grandmother, well, that was one of her heroes, and her nickname was Moot, because of the fact she argued so well and would usually win every argument. So arguing back with her was pretty much a moot point. Nyla was walking in her footsteps. She was only 5'2" and weighed 110 pounds, but she could hold her own. She just had that air about her, and you would forget that she was as tiny as she was. Leah, her oldest sister, said that in the summer of 1991 she was turning 21, and Nyla was only 12. You wouldn't know that she was just a child because she would talk like an adult and have grown-up conversations. People were shocked. She was so well-spoken. She would ask people what they were doing in their lives, and she would keep up with every word. Even though she had this quiet little voice, she was bold, headstrong, and beautiful. Ashley with a Y grew up in the same house as Nyla, and they kind of had a little sibling rivalry, things that you would look back on later in life and laugh about. And that's exactly what they did. Nyla would mess with Ashley all the time. She would do things like tell her that her Barbie's hair would grow back if she cut it all off. And of course, Ashley trusted her, but then did it and found out it wouldn't grow back. To get a little revenge, she would take pages out of Nyla's notebook and tear them out. Ooh, that made her pretty mad because she put so much effort into her schoolwork. Ashley would also purposely embarrass Nyla, especially when her friend Dana would call the house. Ashley would tell her that Nyla just ate and now she was doing #2. All in good fun, of course. But then, when Nyla left for college, Ashley was super sad. She couldn't stand being away from her. And as they got older, they became closer and closer. Nyla wanted to be involved with everything, from her sister's education to her goals, and even the guys that she dated, because she wanted to know that her sisters were being treated well. You can tell she took her relationships very seriously, and the same goes for her friendships. She kept in touch with her friends throughout her life, with one of her best friends being Dana. They talked and saw each other on a regular basis. She was a go-getter from a young age, very strong-willed, self-assured, and confident. That was one big reason she was so successful throughout her life. When I first saw Nyla's face, I couldn't stop thinking about her smile, and just how unexpected everything that happened was. How this could happen to anyone. And I know that I say that in some of my videos, but that's the truth. This could happen to anyone. It can happen to you, it could happen to me, your loved ones, and it can happen so fast without warning. After Nyla graduated from high school, she studied at one of the top universities, the University of Illinois at Urbana. She graduated with a degree in advertising, then took her first job after college in 2001 as an assistant advertising executive at Leo Burnett. She worked there for 5 years, then decided to take a chance and apply for a coveted sales position in an entirely different profession with a major pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly in Chicago. She landed the job as a pharmaceutical rep. Nyla really wanted to have a financially lucrative career, and she believed this was the path to get her there. Between the time that she spent traveling to different doctors' offices, meeting with the physicians, and providing samples of medications on the market throughout her designated territory around Illinois, she also enjoyed interior decorating. She was good at it. It started when she helped her ex-boyfriend decorate his home. Now she had paying clients lining up to use her skills. She was making a really good salary, had so much to look forward to, and so many aspirations. She was really just getting started in life. This story and everything that unfolds happened when Nyla was 28 years old. She seemingly had it all: talent, money, and a lot of connections. There wasn't a lack of lavish parties, upscale nightclubs, and fine dining. Lots of fun. Oh, and there definitely wasn't a lack of men in Nyla's life either. However, she did have high standards, as she should. She's an amazing person, She would be a gift to anyone. Her beauty, plus her smile, were magnetic, not to mention her charismatic personality. It just drew people in. She wanted someone who was either equal or would challenge her. She dated men with wealth and status, and she had a type. Handsome, educated, intelligent, and successful. She dated plastic surgeons, lawyers, you name it. Not too long before this, in May of 2006, she landed a handsome, successful 28-year-old real estate investor named Reginald Pots. She wasn't the only one with her eye on him, and he wasn't hard to miss. He strutted around in his designer clothes, Gucci shoes, three-piece suits, totally decked out. To top it off, he drove a $225,000 white Bentley, and he let everyone know about it. Yep, that'll do it. He was very popular in the groups that Nyla socialized with, known as the most eligible bachelor living in a penthouse suite at 111 South Wabash. Alright, I have to show you an example of what this place looks like. It's in the heart of the South Loop overlooking the harbor. This isn't his exact condo, but I had to show you a similar one. Just look at it. It's spacious, has so much natural light coming in, and is high above the city. Luxury living for sure. It's exactly the type of place I'd imagine a man like Reginald living in. I'll go ahead and let the slideshow keep playing for a minute in case you want to see more. So that gives you a pretty good idea why women wanted to be in Reginald's life and on his arm. Because he was quite a catch. It wasn't a surprise that he and Nyla connected, but she was just as desirable to men. She may not have been driving a Bentley, but she was successful in her own right. She also had a luxury condo. In fact, it was only 10 minutes away from Reginald's place. Hers was at University Village condominiums. To be fair, I have to show you an example of what her place looked like. It's so pretty. Now this is not her actual condominium, just an example. It's not as high up above the city as Reginald's place, but it still has those skyline views. Beautiful and cozy fireplace, sleek white quartz countertops, and again that natural light. Nice little balcony to enjoy the views. Now you can see Nyla loving it here. So it's true she wasn't driving around a Bentley, but she did have a nice black Chevy Impala that her company paid for. It was easy for Nyla and Reginald to be drawn to one another, and it wasn't long before they started seeing each other more frequently. You could say they were quite a power couple. It was a fun, intense relationship with a lot of chemistry, and they enjoyed nice dinners, going to parties, and hooking up together. But, like many of these really intense relationships, they tend to fizzle out, and that's exactly what happened between Reginald and Nyla. As it turned out, this just wasn't a forever thing. Besides, Nyla had met someone new, so she decided to officially break it off with Reginald in July of 2007. That meant she was free to explore this new relationship with a handsome gentleman named Andre Wright. He certainly lived up to his name because he was Mr. Right in Nyla's eyes. Andre is a successful lawyer. He's educated, sophisticated, kind, and generous. They met while they were attending an art gallery opening, and their connection was instant. They really enjoyed each other's company, and Andre treated Nyla better than the other men she had dated in the past. It didn't take long before they were in a serious relationship. The only thing keeping them a little bit apart was that he was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time, so they had a long-distance relationship. However, they would both travel to see one another on a frequent basis, and with technology, the distance wasn't an issue. Their relationship grew, even though there were miles between them. It was worth it for both of them to put in the work because they cared about their future, and they were even talking about moving in together. They would do weekend trips away with each other to keep the flame burning and the passion alive. And when they were apart, they would text each other all day long. In September, they had been dating exclusively for 3 months. Andre had even met Nyla's family, and Leah liked him right away because they met at Leah's daughter's first birthday. She was pleasantly surprised when Andre took it upon himself to pick out a special gift for Leah's daughter's big day. Now that you know a lot about Nyla, her personality, lifestyle, boyfriend, and who she was, I want to go to the weekend before Tuesday, September 18th, 2007. That was the weekend of Friday the 14th through Sunday the 16th. They had a fun weekend together, as usual. She went to see Andre at his place in Milwaukee. and on the 16th they attended a wedding for one of Andre's friends. Then, Nyla went back to Chicago. The work week was progressing as usual until Tuesday the 18th. The couple kind of had a ritual. Every morning Andre would call Nyla, not as a wake-up call, but as a good morning call. And she came to expect it every morning to start her day. That Tuesday, Andre was a lot busier than usual, and it totally slipped his mind because it was so routine. He actually thought he already called her. However, he had forgotten, and instead, Nyla called him, asking, "Where's my morning call?" He apologized, but she wasn't mad at him, she was just teasing him. So they had a little chit-chat and then went about their morning, keeping in touch by emailing each other back and forth as usual. Around noon, Nyla calls into work, telling them that she's going to take the rest of the day off as a personal day. Perhaps she needed some rest because she had traveled over the weekend. Being tired was to be expected because she had a very fast-paced job. She was always at different doctors' offices, giving them samples of medicines and pharmaceutical products, and then driving all over the city. Even though she was busy and took her job very seriously, she made it a point to always be available for the people she cared about, especially her sisters. Like many of us, she always had her phone on her. She wouldn't just text you back either, she would pick it up and call you. She kept in touch with her family non-stop, and she was even known to jump right out of the shower to answer a call from them. After Andre got off work, he called her as usual, but she didn't answer. So he left a message saying, "Hey, I'm heading home. Call me back when you get this." A little while later, he got a text message back from her that said, "Hey, I'll reach out later. I'm at dinner," which was a little unusual. It was out of character because normally Andre would be aware of what Nyla's plans were. She would also answer the phone no matter what she was doing, where she was going, or who she was with. A few hours later, when he was settling in for the evening, he tried calling her again, but she failed to answer. This concerned him. She was a woman of her word. If she said she was going to call you back, she did. Maybe she was tired and fell asleep, so Andre went to bed expecting to pick up their conversation as usual the next morning on Wednesday, September 19th. But again, she didn't answer. He emailed her in all caps saying, "Are you alive?" He's half joking, but he's concerned. We've probably all said that, like, "Are you alive? Where are you?" Or you've responded, "I'm alive." Well, something else was happening that morning when Nyla's older sister Leah, who was a PR executive, got into her office. Her phone was ringing. When she picked it up, there was a man on the other end. He introduced himself as Nyla's boss, and he informed Leah that Nyla never showed up for work. She had a meeting with him that day, and he wanted to know if Leah had heard from her. She hadn't, and she knew something was wrong right away. There's no way that her sister would miss a work meeting. Leah tried to think of reasons why Nyla wouldn't have at least called in to let her boss know. Leah calls her sister Ashley, and that's when she finds out that Ashley attempted to get in touch with Nyla, just like Andre did the night before. Ashley had texted Nyla that evening and got the same exact text that Andre received, that she was at dinner and would reach back out later. They both thought that was really off, so they reached out to Andre. He told them the same story, that he never got back in touch with her because she never called him. That's when they started calling around. The more people they spoke to, the more concerned they got because no one could reach Nyla. By the end of that night, her phone was going straight to voicemail. Leah goes down to the Chicago Police Department and files a missing persons report. But when she does, like in many of the cases we've heard before, they tell her, "You know what? Don't get worried yet. She's an adult. She could have things going on in her life that you don't know about. She might not have time to reach out. Don't jump to conclusions." But the family just knew better. They just knew. They had that gut feeling, and sometimes it's right. None of this seemed normal because they knew their family member better than some random police officer. The police officers insisted that Nyla would turn up, saying most adults that go missing turn up, so don't stress, she probably went on vacation. No, she would never do that. If she needed to get away, even from her own family, she would let them know. Remember, she's pretty blunt. Her family wasn't going to wait around for the police. Leah started right away. Remember how she's a PR executive? She knows how to get the buzz around a story. She didn't wait a second to get her sister's story out there. She called every media contact that she had and begged them to spread the word. I listened to an interview with Leah, and she said something really important that I wanted to share. She said, "Quite frankly, I don't know a lot of women of color or people of color who get the same attention by the public in general." The interviewer responded by saying, "The good-looking young blonde goes missing, and the whole world wants to know about it, and they stay talking about it for years. It's not the same for black women." Leah agreed, saying, "There's a reality to that. It troubles the mind that when people of color go missing, or it doesn't fit a certain narrative, somehow it's not real." Leah's media savvy definitely paid off, because the next morning, guess what? Nyla's picture was all over the news. She got the attention of the public. The family was already out on the streets. Friends were helping. They were putting out flyers, taping them to poles, and handing them out to people on the street that were walking by. Meanwhile, Dana and Leah went to Nyla's condo. They knocked, but no one answered. Her condo was locked, which they said was unusual, and that surprised me. I would assume it would be unusual if it wasn't locked. But Leah was able to get a key. When she stepped inside, something seemed wrong. The place was in somewhat of a disarray, which was not like Nyla. There were eggs and coffee on the countertop, which weren't put away. Additionally, she could tell Nyla's business-issued laptop, her personal laptop, and her iPad were missing. Her cell phone wasn't there either, and her car was not parked in the usual parking spot in the garage. So where is she? What happened? Dana also knew the passcode to Nyla's voicemail, and we're going to go into detail about that later, but I can tell you there is definitely something significant about Nyla's voice messages. 3 whole days go by, and they're still searching. At this point, police are beginning to take the search seriously. Andre decides to fly in to join them, and everyone's hoping they will locate Nyla. Now, you probably know from watching a lot of true crime cases that the first person they're going to look at is the boyfriend. And indeed, they brought him in for questioning. He told them exactly what we already know, that they saw each other over the weekend, that he talked to her briefly on Tuesday, and that he hadn't heard back from her at all since then. Everyone had kind things to say about Nyla. There were no red flags when it came to Andre's interview. So the next thing the police do is check her phone records. Even though they don't physically have her phone, they can look at her phone records to get an idea of who she was talking to last. What phone calls did she make or take? The investigators were doing everything they could, even interviewing her doctors, retracing her steps anywhere she had been in the last month or so, and talking to everyone that knew her or anyone that had a relationship with her whatsoever. After all the publicity, anonymous tips started flooding in, but none of them led anywhere. When the police subpoenaed Nyla's phone records, they got their first significant lead. They discovered suspicious messages sent from her phone to Andre, her friend Devin, and her sister Ashley between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. These messages didn't sound anything like her. Her co-workers also received text messages that day that made no sense, discussing work locations she was supposed to be at but wasn't. The investigators traced a number she called, which led them to a restaurant. They found out that someone, presumably a man, called and made a dinner reservation under the last name Franklin, which was Nyla's last name. However, no one showed up for that reservation. Even more out of character were a series of text messages sent to one of Nyla's ex-boyfriends, Brent, around 7:30 p.m. The texts were completely random. Then Brent received a call from her. He could barely hear her. There was so much wind, static, or noise in the background. All he heard was, "Hello, hello, can you hear me?" before the call disconnected. A few seconds later, another call came in from her, but it was immediately disconnected as well. When Brent tried calling back, it went straight to her voicemail. The most disturbing lead uncovered by the police were 3 calls made from Nyla's phone at 10:15 p.m. the night she went missing. These calls were made to 911. All 911 calls are recorded, even if no one speaks. And that's exactly what happened in this case. All that could be heard was what sounded like music playing in the background. By 11:05 p.m., all incoming calls to Nyla's phone were going directly to voicemail, and no outgoing calls were made again. Reading about all this, it's natural to wonder if this was related to a mental health issue. With the stress at work, a recent breakup, a new relationship, and all the traveling, it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to exhibit unusual behavior when they're overwhelmed. However, Nyla's family seemed very close and would likely have noticed if something was seriously wrong. Her sisters, in particular, were very close to her, so the idea that she was hiding something like that seemed unlikely. The second thought was that someone else had her phone, someone who was making those calls and sending those messages. But who? Did she make that dinner reservation and just never show up because something happened to her that night? Did she try to call her ex for help? It was all a mystery, but some of that mystery was beginning to unravel. In Calumet City, Illinois, about 25 miles outside of Chicago, a police officer was making his rounds through a golf course parking lot. It was just an ordinary night, and he was checking to ensure everything was secure. That's when he saw something strange in the distance. At first it looked like a stack of cardboard shipping boxes along the curb, so he assumed it was garbage. He parked his patrol car and walked over to take a closer look. The boxes were filled with prescription drugs, hundreds of pills, not in bottles, but in small sample packs. The officer thought it might be evidence of a narcotics-related crime. Perhaps there had been a robbery at a doctor's office, and the thieves had to leave some boxes behind because they couldn't carry them all. Regardless, he knew he needed to take the boxes back to the station for processing. As he was logging the contents later, he noticed a label on one of the boxes with an address and a name: Nyla Franklin. He ran the name and discovered she was a missing person out of Chicago. He immediately contacted the detectives handling Nyla's case. They quickly realized that these prescription samples belonged to her. Now they had to figure out why they ended up 25 miles away from where she lived. This discovery marked a turning point in the investigation. Whenever something related to a missing person is found, but not the person themselves, it's usually a bad sign. The detectives and FBI wasted no time and began searching the area around where the boxes were found, hoping to uncover more clues about what had happened to Nyla. In Calumet City, this is not a bustling area. It's secluded, near a few run-down abandoned businesses. They had a Long John Silver's, I'm going to show it on the screen, a relic of a VideoMax video rental store, kind of like Blockbuster, and an Outback Steakhouse that was adjacent to the River Oaks golf course. These businesses were no longer there on Google Maps, just the Outback Steakhouse and the golf course. But you can see that the parking lot abuts the lagoon, and this lagoon wraps around this entire area. Here's an aerial view and some shots from the street view. It's a highly wooded area, a forest preserve with tall grass and swampy, murky water. As the detectives are making their way to where the shipping boxes were found, they find themselves standing in front of a somewhat steep embankment that drops down into the woods and leads right into the water. They're probably thinking what you're thinking, what I was thinking. Is this where we're going to find something bad? Maybe Nyla? They used their flashlights because they wanted to shed some light in that area. And here's a few pictures. Now, in these pictures it's winter, but when this was happening it wasn't, it was hot. They made the decision that they're going to dredge the lagoon. They had divers in there searching, as well as police and FBI combing this entire area, all around the buildings, the parking lot, through all the brush. And by the end of the day, as night was falling, they found yet another piece of evidence. Jewelry, specifically earrings, a bracelet, and a pearl necklace, which had been broken. Some of the beads were on the ground, and some of them remained on a string that was hanging from a branch. I'm going to show you in this picture. This is not a good sign at all. The cops brought these items to her friends to try to identify them, and they said, yeah, it looks like items that belong to Nyla. Shocking. It's unbelievable. I can't imagine the thoughts that would be going through my head if I were looking at jewelry that I know belongs to someone I care about. You don't know what to think, but your mind tends to think of the worst-case scenario. Why would her jewelry be on bushes if she wasn't running through there for her life? Did she take them off and place them there so that people would know that she had been in that area? More mysteries. They scoured every inch of that area, including the lagoon, and they did not find anything except for that jewelry. The family is getting more eager to get the word out. With Leah and her PR expertise, they're distributing more flyers, knocking on doors, rallying around to bring awareness. Once again, it pays off because another important clue comes in, maybe the most important tip that they had gotten besides the jewelry. Someone called in a tip about a car. They had been watching the news and they saw a picture of a car that was said to belong to Nyla, the black Chevy Impala. They said that there was a similar car parked down the street from them. It was just a block down the road. This person is calling from Hammond, Indiana. Yes, another state, but Indiana borders Illinois. Calumet City is close to that Indiana border, and sure enough, the car was identified as Nyla's. This part was sad. Nyla's sister, Ashley, runs over there as fast as she can. The car was parked in front of a completely abandoned house, and even though she knew that no one was inside, she was determined to figure out what happened to Nyla. So she just kept banging on this door, peering through all the windows and crying and crying. She would not leave. She had to be physically removed because she didn't want to leave the last place she knew her sister had been. It was way too emotional. They had to drag her away. The detectives do a walk around the vehicle, checking to see if there's anything unusual, if anything's broken, if there were any visible fingerprints, any blood, and they don't see anything. Now, of course, they have to do what no investigator looks forward to. They have to open the trunk. They know that one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to open the trunk and find Nyla, either dead or alive, and their search is going to be over, there's going to be closure, or not. They might find nothing, which would be the best case scenario, but it doesn't actually mean it's a positive thing. It means that they have their work cut out for them. But it's time to pop the trunk. They look inside, and they don't find anything. At this point, there's still hope, and her family is holding out hope that she is still alive. But it's not looking good. It looks like there's been foul play. She could have been taken and brought somewhere. The next step is to examine the entire vehicle to see if there's any trace evidence inside. And guess what? They found nothing. The entire car had been wiped clean. What gave away the fact that the car had been wiped, as opposed to it just not having fingerprints left behind, was the fact that they found tiny fibers in various locations, which came from either a cloth or clothing, considering the fact that the car was found in the area. That was a straight shot from where they found the boxes, just 3 miles away. They knew this was probably going to be where they found Nyla, somewhere between these two locations, that is, if she's no longer alive. On September 22nd, officers from both Calumet City and Hammond, Indiana, began searching those areas for any signs of Nyla. They looked at her phone records and were able to confirm that her phone pinged off 2 towers, one in Hammond, the other in Calumet City. They attempted to confirm with Eli Lilly whether this was part of Nyla's territory, a place where she would have been doing business, but her partner Molly said no, that was not part of her route. While the evidence technicians were going through the trunk of Nyla's car, which was in Desiree by the way, they stumbled upon a Remy Martin advertisement card, sort of like a promotional business card. Remy Martin is a type of alcohol, so they never really knew whether something was of significance, but they did feel it was a little out of place, so they kept it in the forefront of their minds, and of course collected everything and made sure to take notes that it could be something significant. In this case, it did become something significant because while they were investigating the lagoon area, they found another Remy Martin card, just like the one they found in the trunk. The second card was found between the lagoon and the golf course parking lot near an Outback Steakhouse. They're starting to pinpoint a connection between the golf course parking lot and where the boxes were found and Nyla's car. After 5 days of searching the entire stretch of land between these locations of interest, they did not find Nyla. The search started to become very personal for one of the officers. Remember the officer who stumbled upon the boxes? Well, his name's Calvin. He had friends in common with Nyla. Their high schools were close by and they graduated around the same time, lots of mutual friends. He had been helping with the search, and he could feel her family's pain. That's why he and a colleague decided to go out to the lagoon, where they found the jewelry, around 4 o'clock in the morning after their shift was over on September 22nd. They wanted to take a look for themselves. They walked all around the bank of the lagoon, and then they walked through the brush, just looking for anything that was out of place, anything they could have missed. I'm going to put a pause on this search because I want to go back to Nyla's voice messages. Remember when I told you that her friend Dana had access to her voicemail on her phone? Well, the real reason she was trying to get in there was because there was a message she wanted to play for the police. It was a message that Nyla had supposedly let her hear, and it was very disturbing. However, when she went to look for it, it was deleted, so she couldn't provide it to the police. She couldn't prove it was real. This was all supposed memory, but she said it was pretty nasty. She told police that Nyla was afraid and said, "If anything happens to me, give the police my email login information." What is going on? Who was this voicemail from? Why would they need her email login? Why would that be important? Then another clue comes in. It's from a neighbor on the same street where the car was found. They say they saw a skinny black male walking around that car the night of September 18th, and then he left in a different vehicle. There were 2 males in Nyla's recent past and present that matched that description: her current boyfriend, Andre, and her recent ex-boyfriend from just a few months ago, Reginald Pots. You know, the one that drives the white Bentley and lives in that nice condo I showed you? We haven't heard about him in a while. They feel it's time to bring him in for some questioning, especially because Dana tells the police that was the person who left the nasty message on Nyla's voicemail. They ask Dana what was going on between Nyla and Reginald. Dana said at some point, when they were seeing each other, Nyla had suspicions that he might be cheating on her. The cops were interested, but it's not a crime to cheat on someone. It's important, but it doesn't mean it has anything to do with her disappearance. However, Dana insisted they take a deeper look. She explained it all started when they were at a party together. One of Nyla's friends knew that she was dating Reginald. They came up to her and said, "You know that guy? He's not who you think he is." That bothered her as much as it offended her, and she thought the woman might just be jealous. She wanted to know more. She already had this sneaking suspicion that something wasn't right. She just didn't have any confirmation. Being a curious person and wanting to get to the bottom of it, like many of us do, she decided to have one of her friends do a background check. She was devastated by what she found, and she was angry. She felt like she had been lied to. She found out he had a criminal record. Now, a criminal record in and of itself doesn't mean that a person is necessarily a bad person, but it can raise some red flags. You want to know who you're dating. There are plenty of people who have been arrested, but what did he do, and should she be afraid of him? It's her choice whether she wanted to date someone who had been arrested or had a criminal record. Maybe not. She had to dig deeper and find out exactly what he was involved in, and whether or not he was actively trying to hide it from her. Some people lie by omission. They think, "Hey, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to tell anyone I've committed a crime or anything," especially if they did their time or if it was far in the past. But she wondered if she were to ask him, would he admit it or would he try to conceal it? Back to the investigation, they had ruled Andre out at this time because he had an alibi. He wasn't even in the state. He was nowhere near Nyla at the time she disappeared. Now they moved on and wanted to interview Reginald. I'm going to warn you, this is going to get deep. It's very convoluted. As much as I say I love details, dare I say this is a little bit too detailed and kind of confusing, but I'm going to try to break it down as simply as I can because all of this is important. I believe details are the most important parts of these cases because it's how everything gets unfolded. It's all the twists and turns that connect things, and that is what I find to be so interesting, but also so scary and frightening. Were there signs? What was happening? Do we really know the people in our lives? That's what I'm about to explain. Reginald, without hesitation, goes down to the Chicago Police Department and agrees to talk to them. He tells them everything, how they met last year, and it was by chance on a street in the ritzy Gold Coast. Nyla was beautiful, sophisticated, and classy. They briefly dated, but they weren't right for each other, and their relationship ended back in July. They were seeing other people, and everything was fine. The police want to know where he was on September 18th. He gives them a recap of his day. He was hanging out with friends. He says he went grocery shopping, made a trip to a Target store, and went out on a couple of dates. He went out with 2 of his girlfriends. Did he have more? I don't know, so I guess the cheating story was true. He had everything right. Why not? Every girl? Definitely a ladies' man. He was most likely cheating when he was with Nyla. She wasn't wrong to assume that he was living a double life. Her friend was right. He wasn't who she thought he was. But that doesn't mean he had anything to do with her disappearance. However, it definitely didn't mean he was Mr. Perfect, like she initially thought he was. Police asked Reginald why the relationship with Nyla ended. Like, you have 3 girlfriends now. Did you have multiple girlfriends when you were seeing Nyla? He admitted he did. He said, from his point of view, his relationship with her was purely sexual, and it fell apart after one of her friends told her that he could be cheating. After she began digging into his life, she uncovered that one of the girls he was dating was pregnant. He was keeping secrets. Police questioned him about whether he was still in contact with Nyla, and he said yes, that they do communicate every now and then, and he was even in contact with her that month. So now the police are even more interested. They asked, who was this other woman that was having your baby or had your baby? And he's like, which one? Because it turns out he'd also been married, another thing he might have been hiding. He had an ex-wife, her name was Natalia, and he had 2 daughters with her, Amaya and Aya. They got married in 2005, just a year before he met Nyla. So this is starting to get pretty interesting now. It doesn't mean that he's guilty of anything except being a douchebag. But we're starting to see something going on here. I think it's important because you don't know who you're getting involved with. Natalia and Reginald had their first daughter a few years before they got married, and they had their second daughter right before they broke up. That was in December of 2005. Reginald moved from Naperville to Chicago. That's how he ended up in Chicago. He said he was still involved in his children's lives and that he visited them and maintained contact with their mother, Natalia. Then he explains he started dating the other woman in March of 2006. That was the woman that Nyla found out was pregnant. Their daughter was born not too long ago, in June of 2007, a month before Jima and Nyla split up. These women are important in this story. It's not for nothing that I'm going into detail about them. So this woman that was pregnant, her name is Ina, and Ina was living with her parents. Ina and Reginald were actually looking for a home together. He was a real estate investor and she worked for a real estate company. They were interested in developing some of their own properties, including a condo in University Village, which is the same condo complex that Nyla lived in. However, this was a very prominent and popular area, so if you are in real estate, you know that it's not really that much of a red flag or anything. It's just one more thing that correlates. Reginald actually met Nyla when he was already dating Ina. He was cheating. He had an ex-wife, he was going through a divorce with 2 kids, and he had a baby on the way. I don't think Nyla knew any of that. The cops wanted to know a little bit more about his interest in the University Village property. He says he's always looking for properties to invest in. He even admitted that he visits those condominiums on a pretty regular basis and was looking to purchase one that same month. He had visited that location a number of times in September. Not really that unusual, but something to think about. It raised some red flags because they were like, okay, he was around that area. Was he there on the day that Nyla went missing? Let's dig into this a little further. Meanwhile, they started to investigate his background. They wanted to find out about the women he was dating, especially the ones that went on a date with him the night that Nyla disappeared. During his alibi, he gave them a name of a woman, Nancy Moreno. Nancy confirmed that Reginald was looking for a University Village condominium. She owned one of the properties that was up for sale, and he did come by that property twice in September. One of those times he was with a woman, which presumably was his girlfriend, Anna. Nancy unfortunately did not have the exact dates, but this did link him to being in that area in September. So the police go back and interview some of Nyla's friends about Reginald. They say that Nyla found him to be pretty arrogant, and that's why she was drawn to Andre. He was so much more respectful to her. Once she found someone better, she was able to move on, but it was hard. She still remained in contact with Reginald, and they asked why. There's one simple reason: he's a good-looking guy. He's kind of the one that got away. Maybe she would have stayed with him if he wasn't all of those things: a liar, a cheater. But sometimes people with that lifestyle do those things. He's living his life, doing whatever he wants, and that's really tough. We've probably all known someone like that. Someone that you want you the way that you want them, and they just don't. So there's all this push and pull and drama. Sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're just lonely, and vice versa. So it's true they were no longer in a relationship, but they were keeping in touch. As a matter of fact, when police are going through Nyla's email, they find one entitled Adios. That email was sent from Nyla to Reginald on July 16th, 2007. This is when they broke up, or at least for the final time. It seems like, from the email, Nyla had already tried to remove him from her life several times, but there was just something about him, something that kept her coming back. There's no way to know exactly what somebody else's relationship was like because we're not living it, but from the email, we can get a glimpse into the way that Nyla felt. She explained in that email that she had tried, like I said, several times to remove him from her life, but somehow he always managed to slip back in. Now she finally had to put it to an end. She wanted to stop all communication. She told him she was very disappointed that he treated the relationship like a game. She called him deeply disrespectful. He constantly flirted with her friends and was obsessed to a point of being pathological over these seemingly insignificant things. He was selfish. He only cared about himself and about money, the money he was so focused on making. And it gets worse. She wrote, "Since the first day we met, you and your life have been nothing but lies." She said that he never told her about his jail time or his criminal history. He constantly lied and made up stories about where he was and what he was doing, and the fact that he probably had other girlfriends the whole time they were together. But the most disturbing thing of all was his refusal to acknowledge the existence of his own children. She ended the email by telling him she never wanted to hear from him again, and if her impulses ever led her to call him, that he should not answer. That if that happened, it didn't mean anything. It was just a slip of the brain. So now you can kind of understand where she was coming from when they broke up back in July of 2007. He was one of those people that could kind of charm his way back and worm his way back in. He was good-looking, went to these swanky nightclubs, had the penthouse apartment and the lavish lifestyle. There was also that sexual attraction. It's really strong, that chemistry between them. It might have been really powerful enough for her not to be able to say no. She knew in her heart this was not the type of guy she wanted to be with, and thankfully she had a new man in her life, Andre, so she was in a better situation. But both of her friends, Dana and Tiffany, confirmed that even though Nyla was angry and felt disrespected, she was determined to learn everything about him. It's almost like you want to add insult to injury for some reason. Not that you want to punish yourself, but it just piques your interest. One thing she was really upset about, like I mentioned in the email, was that he was flirting with her friends. Tiffany admitted that she had to turn down his advances all the time. Now, even though I'm telling you this like it's happening really fast, all of this information gathering by police was happening over weeks, if not months. They wanted to find out and hone in on what Reginald was doing on the 18th. His story is that he woke up around 11 a.m. and he went to various places in Chicago, a fishery, a county building, an auto parts store. He was there around 4 o'clock just taking care of an outstanding invoice. Then he left, and he had to meet with a contractor that he had hired to renovate his condo, but the contractor never showed up. Then between about 6 and 10 p.m., he was out shopping with his friends Hugh and Castra. They picked him up at his condo. According to him, they came by and picked him up from his condo and went to Target on Roosevelt Road. They were there to buy a gift from a baby registry. After they were finished, they just drove him home, and then he went out for the evening. First, he met up with a woman named Joy. Then he met up with a girl named Lindsay, and she's the one that ends up spending the night at his condo. To investigators, Reginald didn't seem like a guy that was necessarily hiding anything. As a matter of fact, he was telling them above and beyond what they were asking. We've seen this before. He's going all out. He's letting them know every detail, who he was with, their first names, their last names. He didn't seem to be hiding anything. He gave all the phone numbers to the police and said go ahead and reach out to these people, and that's exactly what they did. They wanted to track down this couple, Hugh and Castra Eccles. But I do want to shift our focus back to Dana for a moment. There is important information that starts to come out in relation to Reginald coming from Dana. She said that the messages she wanted the police to hear came from him, and he was threatening her and yelling at her, telling her to stay out of his life and his business. Police wanted to know why. Why would she still be in his life, in his business? What led him to leave these messages? Were they out of the blue? Why was he angry? Dana explains that in her anger, Nyla decided she was going to start letting people know that Reginald was not a very good guy. He wasn't who he was pretending to be. She was determined to let other women know what happened to her and what he might do to them. She might have thought that this was something valiant, or maybe she was just doing it out of spite. We don't know. What we do know is that she was able to track down his girlfriend, Ina, the one that was pregnant with his baby, and that started a twerk storm. Ina had just given birth, and here Nyla was telling her that she was having sex with Reginald the whole time. Ina is shocked. She's got this little baby at home. She thinks she's dating this amazing guy. They're looking for a property together to start a new life, and now she's finding out that he's been with this other woman the whole time. However, she believed Nyla because she had so much evidence. They continued talking and sharing information, and the more they shared with each other, the more livid they both became. Ina let Nyla in on something else. Reginald was actually supposed to be paying child support for his 2 other kids, but he wasn't. He also got physical with her. Everything was starting to unravel, and Nyla couldn't believe it. She was actually kind of lucky that she didn't stay with him, that she uncovered these things before she got deeper and deeper into that relationship. She let him go, and it seemed like things were over. She didn't have to worry about it anymore. She got everything off her chest and let the other girlfriend know. But then, in August of 2007, just a month later, she finds out that one of her colleagues is dating him, and it set her off. Was this on purpose? Was it to rub it in her face? Did he go seek out one of her colleagues? It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that now Nyla was going to let this woman know that he was manipulating her. I don't know exactly what she told this woman. It might have been about his criminal record. And we really haven't talked about his criminal record, and it's important I let you in on exactly what it consisted of. It's a little more intense than, oh, I got pulled over for speeding, or I was drunk in public, some of the things we hear about when younger people find themselves in a bad situation. This was a little different. But before I go into that, I always wonder, is this the right thing to do? And what I mean by that is I think to myself, is it my place to say something? Every relationship is so different. I'm not saying this is a good guy, and I'm not saying that he wasn't doing anything wrong. All I'm saying is I just personally ask myself whether or not I should tell this to someone else. Maybe he's not going to do the same thing in every relationship, but the past seems to repeat itself. In this case, we're talking about a man who had 8 felony convictions and 3 misdemeanor convictions. Car theft, physical altercations, orders of protection from women. It was intense, and his record dated all the way back to the 90s. He had punched a gas station attendant. He'd threatened police officers. And once the cops got a copy of his criminal record, they thought it was a pretty bad sign considering Nyla went missing. And now all these things are coming to the surface. It's been confirmed she had a major problem with him, and she was trying to go tell other people about what was happening. One friend says Reginald was pissed. He was really upset that she was going around telling people that he's a cheater and that he wasn't who he said he was. As the police are sifting through all of these emails, they see one from September 6th. This was an email that someone sent to Nyla, one of her friends. It was an article about Reginald. I don't know if they were trying to stir things up with her again, I'm not sure. But it's from the Chicago Sun-Times. Nyla reads it and decides to forward this article to Dana and Tiffany. That's how we know about everything that transpired. Tiffany told the police that Nyla had blind copied, so she BCC'd the forwarded email to Reginald and wrote in the body, "This is ridiculous." The article explained that Reginald was arrested on drugs and weapons charges and for threatening a Highland Park police officer who was investigating him for stealing cars. While he was alone for just a moment in this federal building, the skinny Pops slipped out of handcuffs and escaped. While he was on the run, he called the FBI and was bragging to them that they'll never catch him, kind of like, catch me if you can. Finally, 2 weeks later, agents found him hiding under a bush and arrested him. That's what started all of these hateful messages going back and forth over the next few weeks, and this was just a couple weeks before Nyla went missing. Now he's really looking like a suspect. Warning: adult content. I don't know if you're watching this around a kid, but language is going to be a little bit explicit. The first heated communication starts off with a voice message. He calls her, and she doesn't answer, so he decides to go off on her in the voice message. He talks about how he's so rich and he'll always be surrounded by these hot women and all the lavish things, and he'll always be living the life. He says she is just so hung up on him, desperate and angry, and that she won't stop with all the stuff she's doing. And now he knows he's never gonna with her again. He said she was bitter and venomous, and she doesn't deserve the things that he has. He tells her to forget about him and stop digging in his business and leave him alone. He also responded to the forwarded email with the article in it, and he copied Tiffany and Dana among other people, defending himself once again and repeating his request not to be dragged into whatever drama was going on with Nyla. The subject line for the forwarded email said, "I'm rich, so that don't even matter." In that email, he wrote how it was just so sad that she was so caught up in him and mad that he would no longer take her calls or come over and her anymore. He said, "Don't be upset. You give okay head and your ass is kind of tight, so you should be able to find a decent man in no time. Just do yourself a favor and get a lift for those saggy ass breasts." Then he warned her to stop testing him or trying to figure out his next move or who he's with. He ended with, "The article didn't even embarrass him at all, it just made her look bitter and desperate. And if she kept talking and sending articles, he would respond by passing around copies of the video they made that shows his dick in her mouth." Instead of ignoring this message, Nyla decides to write back. She was the type of person who really didn't take crap from anyone, so she told him he was being dramatic and that he was clearly crazy. She also wanted to know how he got all of her friends' email addresses, and she said, "Do not contact Dana or Tiffany or her ever again. They were all sick and have had enough of his obsessive calling and his behavior." Now Reginald calls her on her phone again. Dana is on the other line. She tells Dana to hold on, and she takes his call. When she returned to talk to Dana, that's when she told her she was scared. That's when she gave Dana the information about her username and her password to both her voicemail and her email, in case anything happened to her. Dana said that over the next few days, they talked and texted about this situation all the time. Nyla told her that she was becoming even more afraid that he was going to retaliate in some kind of way. Now, remember that she's sharing information with Ina, and Ina lets her know that she's confronted Reginald and that he is really not happy. Now he's surrounded by all this drama with women, everyone's finding things out, people know he's a two-timer and he has a criminal past. Both of the women decide that they want to file orders of protection against him. Instead of just doing it, Nyla decides to let Reginald know that she's going to do it. So she emailed him that she was going to file a police report seeking an order of protection, and she said, "Don't come anywhere near me, because if you do, you'll be back in jail. I promise you're crazy, you hit women, you're a bully, and you're extremely dangerous, but you won't bully me. You're messing with the wrong woman." These emails and voice messages and phone calls went back and forth, but then they finally stopped around September 11th. That was when Nyla spent those few days with Andre in Wisconsin. When she came back, she told Tiffany that she was serious about seeking a restraining order against him. She was afraid, and she also emailed Ina and told her they should share information so that they could file a similar order. That same day, Nyla told her friend Devin Carter that Reginald threatened to kill her. She even said, "If something happens to me, he did it." And this was just on September 17th, a day before Nyla goes missing. What was this about? What did he say? Well, it turns out he sent her a voicemail that Dana could no longer find. The one that Dana really wanted to give to police, because all this other stuff, it doesn't prove anything. It proves he's a cheater, that he has a criminal past, and he treats women really badly, but it doesn't have any real threats directly toward Nyla, other than to just stop testing him. Dana insists there was a voicemail where he threatened to erase her, and that was why she decided to file the protective order. That was a threat saying you're going to erase someone, it means you're going to make them disappear. And then she disappeared. But you may be wondering about all these other women. The past seems to repeat itself, and he hasn't harmed any of these other women and taken their lives. So did he really do anything to Nyla? Well, it's time to dig into that situation real quick. Police interview Natalia, his ex-wife, and sure enough, she admits he had gotten physical with her. They lived together in a small apartment in Naperville, and there were several instances where he had harmed her. They got into an argument one time when they were driving on the freeway, and they had their 4-year-old daughter in the back seat. Natalia got hit in her face and in her right eye. She tried to pull over and she was crying and screaming, and he just apologized. She was super swollen. She had to miss work and school and wear sunglasses. She didn't tell anyone because she was afraid he was on parole, and at that time she didn't want to get him in trouble. Then in the summer of 2005, she was pushed onto a bed. A pillow was put over her face and pushed down until she couldn't breathe. She was finally able to break free because her daughter came into the room and she told her to call 911. But Reginald said to her he could have done a lot to her before they ever arrived. These threats were serious. Then later in 2005, he put his hands around her neck. He only stopped because once again their daughter came into the room. If she hadn't, Natalia might not be here. By December 2005, the month that they had their daughter, Reginald finally moved out of the apartment in Naperville, and then he was living in Chicago. But that didn't end the suffering, because one time he grabbed her by the arm and threw her to the floor. She was once again too afraid to file a report. By January of 2006, she filed for divorce, and he was enraged. She got hit in the head and it was bad. She even bled. He wouldn't take her to the emergency room because he knew he would get in trouble and possibly arrested. He just drove her by a nearby hospital and dropped her off and left. After that, they finally went their separate ways, and she settled into a new townhouse. But she still let him have contact with their daughters, and she had just seen him on Mother's Day in May. That didn't go well because they got into an argument. They yelled at each other every single time they had to talk or exchange their children. It was a mess. On Mother's Day, she had to call the police, but he grabbed the phone and he drove off with it. A couple weeks later, he shows up without being invited, gets in her face again. She calls the police and she's screaming, but he just keeps taunting her and saying, "Go ahead, I'm rich. I have all the money to bail myself out." He grabs the phone out of her hand, drives away with her phone, and her arm was left injured. That time, she gets a neighbor's phone, calls the police, and files an order of protection. That's the day their divorce was set into motion. But she didn't put any of that in the divorce petition, so none of it was on his record. In March 2006, Aina starts dating him. She knew nothing about him getting physical with Natalia. On September 8th, while he's exchanging these communications with Nyla, and he's really upset, he's at Aina's parents' house asking them for money. What is that all about? He's supposed to be this rich guy with all this money and designer outfits. Of course, I'm gonna tell you all the details, but he and Aina got into an argument. It was scary because he was holding Ava, who was only 3 months old. And guess what? He starts putting his hands around Aina's neck. The only reason he stopped is because Aina's mother came in and tried breaking down a glass door. He then grabbed Ava and left the house. When Aina tried to follow him because she was afraid for her daughter, he pushed her down a flight of stairs and drove off. When he came back, he started arguing with her mother. Thank goodness nothing happened to Ava. Aina was upstairs in a closet hiding. The next day, he comes back and he's kicking and screaming, kicking the back door in, and tells her he's losing his patience. We remove him from the property, and then 3 days later, she tried to file a protective order, but she went to the wrong courthouse. She eventually did get that order on September 18th, the exact same day Nyla disappeared. And that's also the same day that Aina initially got in touch with Natalia. That's right, his ex-wife. So now his ex-wife and his current girlfriend, who both share children with him, just got in touch with each other on the 18th. It sounds very, very suspicious. Knowing all of this, he is definitely the #1 suspect, but he has an alibi. He was at Target, and he says he was with those other women, and they corroborated his story. We're going to hear more about his Target trip and what his friends had to say, but I have to go back because we left off on September 18th. Again, all this time, the cops are still looking for Nyla. I told you there was someone very close to this case, Calvin. And we left off with him and his colleague deciding to go out on their own and look for Nyla. At 4 o'clock in the morning on the 27th, they got their flashlights and walked right into the wooded area. There was just something about that area. It kept bothering Calvin. He just had a gut feeling. After looking around, his partner saw something hanging from a tree. They practically lit up in the darkness because they were white and contrasted against the dark sky when the flashlight would shine towards them in the dark. They knew they were onto something. I can't help but think that they were placed there on purpose, like breadcrumbs, Nyla leaving behind clues to her whereabouts. As they kept going, they were crossing into the adjacent parking lot near the preserve, a parking lot of a rundown video store that I mentioned. They were approximately 20 feet from the edge of that lot and directly in front of the preserve. This was half a mile away from where they found Nyla's car. Calvin saw this section of grassy weeds that came up to his waist. He could tell that there was almost a perfect path through the grass. He started to follow it. He only got about 5 or 6 steps in, and that's when he saw something. It just didn't look right to him. As Calvin got closer, his worst fears were realized because when he looked down, he realized that he was looking at human remains. He was completely shocked. He knew what he was seeing, but he just kept thinking, how do I know it's her? In all likelihood, it was her. Who else would it be? It wouldn't just be another random person, but he didn't want to think that was true. It couldn't be true because how could they have missed this? The cops were focusing more on the lagoon and not really in this other area behind the video store. This was 9 days after she had gone missing, and now everyone's fears had come true. This wasn't the body of someone who had just died. It was decomposed. It couldn't be identified. I can't go into full detail, and you know why. A lot of you really wouldn't want me to anyway, because it just sticks with you. They knew it was the body of a woman. She wasn't clothed and was only partially buried in a shallow grave. They ended up needing dental records to identify the remains. A doctor named Dr. Crowns was the pathologist who performed the autopsy. The remains were partially mummified and skeletonized, and they estimated that she had passed away 8 to 12 days earlier, sometime between September 16th and 20th. It was ruled a homicide. The night before, they got the horrible news. The family had gotten together and surrounded Nyla's mother and father. For 9 days, they had continued to believe that Nyla was going to come back alive. That night, her uncle Dwayne Johnson said that he was just pacing back and forth, just just waiting to find out if the body they found was Nyla's. They just kept thinking maybe it's not. They still hadn't gotten word by 10:30 that morning, so they really thought maybe it's not her. 11:30 rolled around and then it was noon. But then the call came in at 12:30, and that's when everything came crashing down. Her uncle said that when the call came in and you hear it, it's like, God, no, not Nyla. Everyone cared about this family. They were rallying around them, giving them support. John, Nyla's younger brother, was in high school and was also holding out hope. All of his classmates just surrounded him, his fellow students and people that didn't even know him that well. They were all attending the prayer vigils and showing concern for Nyla. He still went to school that day, and everyone gathered together around this flagpole to support him and pray for him and his family. But all of that hope was completely shattered. Sadly, the dental records did confirm that the identity of the remains was that of Nyla Franklin. But there was a lack of injury. There wasn't anything that could be observed on the outside. So the doctors concluded that the cause of death was asphyxiation, which could have been done in a variety of ways. I know you can imagine all of those ways: an item, plastic bag, pillow, something that would obviously cause someone not to be able to breathe. Now they're trying to find someone who committed a homicide. They're no longer looking for Nyla, and of course, her family is completely torn apart. How could you ever think that something like this was going to happen to the person you love, someone close to you, someone you just spoke to? Her family wants answers. As soon as the sun came up, the police were on the scene. They were blocking everything off. They didn't want anyone in that area. There were all kinds of people coming up on the scene: friends, relatives, media, and a bunch of people who just wanted to take photos. This location was Wentworth Woods Forest Preserve. It's on the north side of this road right here. There were officials from Calumet City, Chicago's Cook County Sheriff's Office, Cook County Forest Preserve Police Department, and the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. A spokesperson for the family said this: "Please continue to keep us in your thoughts and prayers during this sorrowful time. As we move forward, the family asks that you respect this time of mourning as they plan the celebration of Nyla Franklin's life. She will be greatly missed by all of the family." They also express their thankfulness for everyone's efforts in searching and praying. On October 3rd, still not knowing exactly what happened to Nyla, all of her friends and family gathered for her funeral. More than 1,000 people showed up at the Trinity United Church of Christ on 400 West 95th Street. Nyla just couldn't have known how many people she was going to impact. The search was still on to figure out who did this to her. They went back over all the clues and found something. Remember that Remy Martin card they found in the trunk, and then another one in the parking lot? Well, while they were interviewing people, they found out about Kimberly Nash, a woman Reginald had been seeing at the time. She was a marketing manager for Remy Martin. Now things are heating back up, because what would her business card be doing in Nyla's trunk, as well as where the Eli Lilly boxes were found? Obviously, there's some kind of connection between Reginald and Nyla's death. This is when the police decide they're going to get a search warrant. Now they had this connection and probable cause. Something from his condo was at the scene where they found her body. Detectives go there, and right when they get there, they notice his front door is extremely damaged. It looks like it had been kicked in. That was strange. It did look like there had been some foul play, but they found out there was a reason his door was like that, and it had nothing to do with Nyla. A few weeks ago, the Cook County Sheriff's Department had actually tried to force it open because they were attempting to evict him. This was 2007. A lot of people were falling behind on their bills and mortgages. This was when the whole real estate market was collapsing. Reginald had money issues, even though he was strutting around like he was some kind of baller, wearing all the designer brands. His whole closet was full of designer clothing and Gucci shoes. But guess what? He didn't even have a bed to sleep on. He was literally sleeping on a mattress, with no furniture in his entire condo, not even anything to cook on in his kitchen. You know why? Because someone like him didn't care about those things. The things that were important were eating at fancy restaurants and driving nice cars. This was also a reason why I bet Nyla thought there was something suspicious about him. Something wasn't right. If she had ever been to his condo, which I'm guessing she had, she would probably be thinking, "If you're rich, where's your bed? What's going on? You're an adult." But there was something in his condo that was significant. They found an iPod, and when they ran the serial number, it was confirmed that the original owner was Nyla. Oddly, the device was named Reginald. It used to be named Nyla. Shortly after midnight on September 19th, someone had connected the iPod to iTunes, and what did they do? They changed the name. A brand new iTunes file had been created and the old database was deleted. Why would he have her iPod? Why would he be changing the name just the next day after she went missing? While they're collecting things from his condo, they're also confronting him about the voice messages. They wanted to know why he was leaving messages like that, and whether he had anything to do with her death. They show him the emails. They have everything on him. He admits, "Yeah, I was angry. It wasn't cool that she was going around town spreading my business around." So they said, "Oh, okay, well, you weren't really happy about it." And he's like, "Who would be?" They reply to him and say, "Yeah, but we heard that you threatened to erase her." This is when Reginald got a little bit angry because he said, "No, I have sisters. I would never say that." And he insisted he's a good guy. But we know otherwise. We know his criminal past. He had just gotten out of prison 2 years before this. Then the police confronted him with something else, his MySpace page. They found some really weird posts that he made right after Nyla's body was discovered. He had all these public pleas about how he was innocent and had nothing to do with it. He was acting like he was the victim. He even went to the media, telling them his story and denying he had anything to do with Nyla's death. His exact words were, "It's an unfortunate situation, but it doesn't mean I should be run through the ringer. I had nothing to do with it." Something you have to understand is that this was November going into December, and no murder charges had been filed yet. No one had been arrested. Reginald was in Cook County Jail because he had violated one of those protective orders. At the same time, he was charged with aggravated battery for hitting a deputy. As far as Nyla's case was concerned, there was a lot of evidence pointing towards Reginald, but it was all circumstantial. There was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime. They still weren't even sure exactly what happened to her or where she was killed. Just because her body was found where it was, doesn't mean that's where it happened. Besides, it wasn't his business cards that were found, it was someone else's. Sure, they were in his condo, but so was Kimberly Nash, and so was Nyla. Did Nyla take them and put them in her trunk, maybe to look into this Kimberly Nash woman? It wasn't until December that Reginald's alibi was thoroughly investigated. There was so much going on in this case. I know it seems like a lot of time has passed, but with everything they had to uncover, interviewing all those people, her family members, her friends, making all these stories make sense and connecting all the dots. Sure, we can look back and think there's an easy line of evidence from A to Z leaning towards him being a suspect, but that's not really how it works. At this point, they're doing an interview with his alibi witnesses, the couple that he said he went to Target with. They're both in for questioning. Since Reginald had already given them information about which Target location they were at, the police proactively went and gathered the surveillance videos. Sure enough, they do see his friends there. The couple backed up everything Reginald said, that they were at Target together on the evening of the 18th, then dropped him off at his condo. But the police came in and confronted them with the surveillance video. They said, "Yeah, we see you and your wife here, but where's Reginald? Why didn't the cameras pick him up?" You can see, I'm putting this on the screen. Here's a screenshot. We all know if you're in a store like Target, you cannot avoid being picked up by surveillance cameras. So what's going on? At that point, they bring Hugh's wife into another interview room and say, "Listen, this is a murder investigation." They tell both of them that they think Reginald might be involved and they need to start telling the truth. Not only that, the police had some other evidence that could actually implicate them in this crime. They let them know they had phone records, so they better start telling the truth or they'll be arrested. That's when Hugh immediately changed his tune. He said, "Yeah, I went to Target with my wife. We were there to print out a registry for a baby shower. When we were shopping around at about 7:45, that's when Reginald called. He said he was stranded and needed a ride home. He gave Hugh directions. Take the I-94 to the 159th Street exit and get off and meet me at the first gas station across from where the Indiana state line is." Wow, Reginald just happened to be across the Indiana state line. Isn't that where they found Nyla's vehicle? When they finally saw him, he was coming from behind the gas station as if he were hiding, and then he got into their car. The police were able to confirm this with surveillance video from the gas station. Then Hugh was begging the police to believe him that this was the only time he was with Reginald that night. His wife corroborated the story but added that when Reginald said he was stranded in Hammond, it was because he got into an argument with his uncle. And it is true, his uncle lived in that area. As a matter of fact, this is his house. She also said that when they picked him up, there wasn't anything suspicious about him. He didn't have any marks on him, and his clothes were not disheveled. There was no dirt on him, and he looked fine. But the cops have something else. Since Reginald was in jail, they had a recording of his last conversation with Hugh right before Hugh was supposed to be interviewed by police. He said, "Reginald called you 3 times. What was that about?" Reginald's exact words were, "The baby registry does a lot." I'm assuming that means it would place them there because they have to print it out and there would be a record of it. But this is getting crazy, and things are really starting to fall apart. Now the police had to check with every alibi witness. They got in touch with a contractor that Reginald was supposed to meet on the afternoon of the 18th, who was remodeling his condo. Well, that never happened. The contractor said yes, he started to remodel the condo, but then Reginald stopped paying him, and the initial $5,000 installment check had bounced. Every single time this contractor tried to collect his money, Reginald wouldn't pick up his phone, so he never got paid. Remember that woman, Nancy, who owned the property in University Village, the same place where Nyla lived? She had told police that Reginald did come visit her property in September, but she didn't remember the dates. Well, apparently there was a friend who was part of his alibi witness, a friend that he had recently reconnected with because he was mentoring him in real estate investment. The day of the 18th, this friend, Aaron, was driving Reginald around. They met up for breakfast, then he took him back home, and then he picked him up again at 10:30 a.m. They drove around to different places. He went into a car dealership to do some business, and then around noon, they went by University Village to see Nancy's property. This was the day that Nyla went missing. He's at her complex. Aaron says that Reginald got out of his car and said he would be right back. He was just going to go check on the property. Well, he left Aaron waiting for 45 minutes, so what was he doing? Was he with Nancy looking at her property from noon to almost 1 o'clock? Where was he in that building? Coincidentally, somewhere around the same time, Nyla called her work and decided to take a personal day for the rest of the day. They spoke to her. They know it was her. So she just happened to take a personal day the exact same day and time that Reginald was in her building. Then Aaron says they left that area and drove to Gold Coast Auto Body Shop, then to a Bentley dealership. Oh, by the way, remember the white Bentley, the $225,000 Bentley that he kept bragging about and flashing around? Probably why he was getting so many girls in the first place, acting like he's this real estate mogul. Well, that was actually another one of his manipulations. He had actually tricked someone into buying it for him and promised to pay them back, but the check bounced. Oh my God, he was just basically manipulating everyone, taking advantage of so many people with his charm and his charisma, just like he did with Nyla. Aaron says he drove him to a couple more businesses and then back to his condo at 6 p.m. to me. So if his alibi is completely wrecked, what was he really doing? Well, that is where CSL, cell site location information, comes in. It will reveal his whereabouts. CSL stands for cell site location information for phones. Nyla's phone, Reginald's phone, and Hugh's phone. We already know that they found evidence that Nyla's phone had been used and bounced off towers in Hammond, linking her to her car location and where the body was eventually found. So the CSL information on the phones shows where the phones are moving, because it's where the signal is bouncing off which tower. The biggest gap of time in this story is when he was actually at Nyla's building for 45 minutes. Now, I am not going to go into every place that each phone involved was at and which time, but I am going to tell you the most important places where the phones pinged. Nyla's phone was present at the vicinity of her condo in the morning. However, Reginald's phone is in precisely the same exact location when her voicemail was accessed at 1:21 p.m. and again at 1:28 p.m., 4 minutes the first time, 6.5 minutes the second time. Is that when some of the voicemail messages were deleted? Around the time that Andre was leaving work at 4 p.m. and was calling Nyla's phone, and she texted back that she couldn't pick up because she was at dinner. Well, at that point, her phone and Reginald's phone were both moving together toward Reginald's condo between 6 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. There is no activity coming from Nyla's phone, most likely because it was shut off. But Reginald's phone was picked up near Nyla's condo between 6:24 p.m. and 6:49 p.m. and then started traveling south on I-94. Just like Hugh said, a call came into his phone from Reginald around 7:10, and that phone call bounced off a tower right near Target. But when he called a second time, the tower that Reginald's phone bounced off was none other than where the pharmaceutical boxes were located, in that parking lot of the River Oaks golf course, and Nyla's phone was in the exact same area. Then between 8:15 and 8:19 p.m., Reginald and Nyla's phone were in the exact same area where her body was found. Around 8:39 p.m., Hugh's phone is traveling toward where Nyla's car was found. Remember, he came to pick up Reginald from his uncle's house, which was just a couple of blocks away. Then all three phones are heading back toward Reginald's condo around 10 o'clock. When Reginald's phone and Nyla's phone were near his condo, that's when the 911 calls were placed. After that, there was no more activity on Nyla's phone. However, Reginald's phone was still making calls. His phone was near North Loop, which was downtown near his condo. That's consistent with Joy's account of that night. She said that they went out, and then surveillance footage does show him coming in with the other woman, showing up and pulling up into the garage and walking into his condo lobby right before midnight. So, piecing all this together, the police finally had enough to charge him. They interviewed him. He's adamant that he is not involved, and he is so confident that he sounds believable. But then he starts acting really strange. He has always maintained his innocence. However, there were eyewitnesses who actually saw him at Nyla's condo. Not only that, they pulled surveillance from her condo, and in fact, he's on camera, and it's chilling. Listen to this. In the days leading up to her disappearance, neighbors and security guards in her building saw Reginald lurking. This is when police believe that he was actually plotting and premeditating her demise. On the morning of September 16th, just a couple of days before she went missing, a resident named Sterling Gunn, which is an interesting name, saw Reginald's Bentley in the parking garage. He noticed that the parking garage was partially closed. Reginald saw this man and said, "Oh, should I move my car?" The guy said, "Nah," but when he looked up again, he saw Reginald spying on him from a different portion of the parking lot, which was really strange. The garage door seemed like it was broken. The next morning, another resident named Sheila Gregory saw Reginald walking down the hallway on the interior of the building. He didn't look like he was coming from anywhere specific, and security footage shows him walking out of the elevator into the parking garage. Lisa Hudson, who was a security guard, went to the parking garage after someone reported that the door wouldn't close. She saw Reginald pacing around and talking on his phone. Later, she and another guard returned to investigate a report of a suspicious person, and they found Reginald in a stairwell. They asked him what he was doing there, and he said he was smoking, but he didn't have a cigarette and it didn't smell like smoke. He also lied to the security guards. He said his name was Johnson from Unit 403, but the guards did not believe him and they called the police. That's when he drove away in his Bentley. They searched the garage, and found that the locking mechanism on the door had been tampered with. Surveillance footage from the building showed Nyla entering the garage in her car shortly before noon on September 18th. She parked her car, went up to her condo, and then returned to the parking garage with Reginald around 1 p.m. The camera shows Nyla walking in front of him, and then she seems to quickly turn her head and look back at him. That was the last time that she was ever confirmed to be alive. It doesn't seem right, she doesn't seem happy. And the part we don't see, but that was in a report I read, was that it looked like he was pulling her inside, that she was being forced by Reginald to go with him against her will. It's pretty obvious that he was the last person that was with Nyla that day. He had the opportunity, the time, and the accessibility to commit this crime. When Aaron dropped him off and waited for him for 45 minutes, that is when that footage shows them getting in the elevator together and going to that parking garage. That was probably where Nyla was killed, in her own car. Reginald forced her in there, put his hands around her neck, and left her there. Then he came back to drive her car to Hammond and leave it there on the side of the road, and then asked his friend for a ride home. It all corroborated with the cell phone towers. Everything connected to what the cell phone records showed. Because remember, at 6:24, Nyla's phone was turned off, and Reginald's phone was at her condo right after that. Both phones started traveling towards Hammond. I guarantee you cannot bring me getting off of the elevators. He's pretty much a con man. That's what it looks like, and that's what Nyla's family and friends believed as well. Now that they had all this evidence, they knew that they were finally going to get justice for their loved one, but that's not exactly what happened. It took 9 years. 9 years, almost a decade, from when Nyla disappeared because this man was a master manipulator. All the qualities, good-looking, conniving, living a double life. Reginald had gotten so many people to believe in him, and he's done it again and again. He has just become this master at manipulation, not only with people, but with the criminal justice system. He was able to delay this trial that long. He played every game. He would hire attorneys and then fire attorneys. When that happens, everything has to start over. There's a whole new process. At one point, he tells the court he's just going to represent himself, and then he changes his mind. This was so hard on Nyla's family. They just wanted justice. They wanted to see him held accountable. They were heartbroken, and worse yet, her father Lee had passed away while this trial was in limbo for 4 years at the time he passed away. Her mom said he died because of this trial, because he lost his daughter. He stopped eating, and he became sick. His health just went downward from there. He died from a broken heart. This family lost so much. The January after Nyla passed away, the family did get together. They went to her condo to pack up some of her things. It was the first time they had been there since she passed away. Leah remembers walking in and smelling Nyla's perfume, and she just envisioned her walking out at any moment to greet them, running up and saying hello. I found this to be so touching. It's one of my favorite things that I read. Just a little bit of happiness in this really sad case that's not even over yet. They went to her condo, they did things for her, they cleaned up, did her dishes, made her bed. I can't even imagine just looking around. It was like she was just there. Everything was just the way that she left it. There was even a cup that she used for her morning coffee still on the countertop. When people do these terrible things to their victims, they don't just take away that person's life, they take away the family's life because they take away the joy and the future. I think with all the people that he tried to fool in his life, the biggest person he was trying to fool was himself. This man had 20 arrests in 4 counties and 8 convictions spanning more than a decade. He had threatened to kill a Highland Park police detective and his family. You're going to hear from that man now. He threatened me I would see the end of his .45, that he would kill me, that he would kidnap my family, kill my family. I would never be safe. In 2003, he pled guilty to hitting a correctional officer in the eye. The next year, in 2004, he called his ex-girlfriend's family numerous times with threats. By March 5, 2008, he was being charged officially with Nyla's murder, and prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. There were 16 counts against him, the highest being for first-degree murder. This case finally went to trial in 2015, and by then, the death penalty had been overturned in the state. When prosecutors were gathering even more evidence, they found out that the abandoned video store, remember that, was actually owned by Reginald's brother-in-law, Mohammed al-Sheikh. He had taken Nyla there shortly after his brother-in-law purchased that property. Wow, that's good. It puts just another nail into Reginald's coffin. The case went to trial in November of 2015, and the sentencing was in 2016. Here's the prosecutor talking at the hearing. It was so hard to hear what her family had to say. The nightmare still haunts me, with her screaming, moaning, and reaching out, begging for her life. But none of us were there to save her. None of us were there to hear her cries. There were 2 deaths as a result of this crime, Nyla and her father. He died as a result of this. He stopped eating, and his health declined. There were a lot of witnesses for the prosecution. Police officers that had handled other cases he was involved in, like this one. When they asked him how bad Reginald was, this was his point of view. County Jail Chief Terry Williams testified that Potts had committed more than 200 violations while in custody, including setting a fire in his cell and sabotaging plumbing. He was asked where Potts ranked among the worst inmates in his career. He's gotta be top 10. His ex-girlfriends testified, his ex-wife, anyone who knew him, and they didn't have nice things to say. Even Reginald's dad, Reginald Pots Sr., spoke at the sentencing, trying to get his sentence reduced. He talked about how Reginald had a broken home and about his upbringing, but none of those things mattered. Oh, and Reginald spoke at his sentencing as well. Are you ready to hear this from the man himself, from the legend in his own mind? Here we go. I'm not a monster. I'm not a monster. I can't ask for forgiveness for something I didn't do. I stand before you and say that I am innocent. I did not murder Nyla, period. Every channel you look at, a man murders his ex-girlfriend because he broke up with her. A man murders his ex-girlfriend after stalking her. There is nothing in this case that suggests that I stalked Nyla Franklin. I feel something's wrong, and I'm going to speak about it. I'm not going to attack anybody. I'm going to speak my mind. Did that not disgust you? It's weird. I didn't like when he said that he can't ask for forgiveness for something he didn't do. No matter what Reginald wanted to say, or how much he wanted to try to convince the jury that he did not have anything to do with Nyla's death, it didn't matter, because it only took them 2 hours to find him guilty. They couldn't be manipulated. I'm going to let the judge tell you exactly what his sentence was. You are a cold, calculating coward of a con man who must be punished. You didn't erase her, Mr. Potts. She lives on in the hearts and minds of all these people. Hereby, I sentence you to spend the rest of your life in the Illinois Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole. You heard the judge. He handed down a life sentence. Today, at the age of 45, he's imprisoned at the medium-security Lawrence Correctional Center in Sumner, Illinois.in. Closing, I want to read you something that I found on Nyla's MySpace page. She had a bunch of photos with her and her friends, smiling and laughing together. She described herself as someone who loved to travel, loved her family, and loved having fun. She said she was extremely opinionated and that her grandmother was her hero. She dreamed of meeting Oprah, Janet Jackson, and Hillary Clinton someday because she thought they were smart and sexy. On her personal website, she wrote, "My friends might call me a busybody. I can never really sit still. I'm always trying to figure out what I should be doing better with my life. I'm sort of a hopeless romantic. I tend to find the romance and beauty in people and in the world around me. Everyone has a story. There's always a lesson to be learned."